Um, Welcome to our Tuesday, January 11th, 2022 Committee of the Whole meeting of the Exeter Township Board of School Directors. Mr. Fike, can you please take roll call?
Dr. Ann Herring?
Here.
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 Here. Here. Here.
Timothy Morgan?
Here.
Julia Schaefer? Allison Wilson?
Here.
8 present, 1 absent.
Thank you. In addition to the 8 board members in attendance this evening, we're also joined at the board table by our solicitor, Sean Lockinger, and members of the school district administration, including Dr. Kimberly Miner, superintendent, Dr. Eric Flam, director of teaching and learning, Dr. Christy Haller, director of human resources, and Mr. Brian Fike, who serves as our business administrator as well as our board secretary. The meeting minutes are attached. Does anybody have any changes or discussion they would like to make regarding meeting minutes for the board reorganization, special voting, and committee of the whole meeting for December 7th, as well as the board voting meeting for December 21st?
Yeah, Dr. Hearing, I do have some modifications requested for the 12/21 voting meeting. There are 4 different areas where the I votes are counted as 8 when it should be a total of 9 members. And I can call out those specific areas if needed.
Okay, if you could, because I know there was our recording secretary was remote and there was a problem with the sound. So if you can tell me, which it's probably in the first 5 or 6 motions.
It was under items 9, 10, 11, and 12.
There's a board member who came later.
I think that's
she
probably
what
happened.
she probably didn't put it in. Should be noted. I think I do have the time written down when that board member came in. So I'll let her know and she can amend that for the next meeting.
Thank you.
We will not be amending the agenda tonight. Let's move on to committees. Education Committee, Mr. Fiddler.
Thank you, Dr. Hearing. There are 2 items that I'd like to move ahead to the voting meeting. It's to vote to approve the 2022-2023 district calendar and a short list of staff conferences. There is one item that is not a voting item, and that is a pandemic task force update. And I guess for that, Dr. Miner? Thank you.
Mr. Fiddler, if you would not mind, I just make 2 brief announcements prior to the pandemic task force. Thank you. The first one I'd like to make is that this evening we have Jen Dorda with us, and she is the teacher who won the SHAPE Award, and she wasn't able to be here when we first announced it. Jen, I wonder if you might stand up at the podium and say a few words about the award and let us acknowledge that accomplishment.
Hello, everybody. So I was very excited to receive the recognition last year, which was for Lancaster, Lebanon, and Berks County. So I was nominated by an anonymous person. I don't know who it was. And then I had to fill out an application, and I was chosen for that last year. Then you go on to state, where it goes on to a different board, and it was much more rigorous questions, and I had to get a letter of recommendation from a student, a fellow teacher, and Dr. Freeze. And that was fun getting the student letter of recommendation, and it was at the end of last year. And I thanked her for that and wrote her a letter, so I appreciated her time. But my focus was more on the mental health, as everyone's is, the social, emotional. So with virtual, I would dress up every week to try and get the students to tune in, whether it was like a gorilla or Halloween costumes that I had, a pirate. Sometimes my daughter would be on board. I did Little Red Riding Hood in the woods, but there was always a joke, and then there was always a health component, and then connecting it to phys ed. So I think that in the horribleness of COVID, I was able to shine and show my true colors, and that is the reason why I was nominated, because of those videos and just being creative with the students. So,
Well, Jen, I just really want to thank you and congratulate you. Your effort is obviously outstanding and so appreciated in such a difficult time, and you're such a terrific representative of the Exeter staff as a whole. Thank you so much for all that you do, and especially in such a trying time.
thank you.
The other quick thing. Oh gosh, no, Jen, no. No, yeah. I would exit as soon as possible. There's a lot. It's a lot. But thank you, Jen. The other thing I'd like to mention is also congratulations to Riften. Riften currently, for first in math, their 5th grade is ranked 9th in the nation, and their 6th grade is ranked 3rd in the nation. So congratulations to Riften's team. All right, now on to the pandemic. So much for education fund. Today we had a meeting of the newly recomposed for 2022 pandemic task force. Many of our members continued on from previous years, including our central office team members, our principals who had been with us the prior year. And then we had some new members today. Dr. Herring joined us as the new president of the board, and Dr. Frank Quigley is a parent in the district and a hospital physician. He was with us last year, and this year another parent who is a physician and has been in charge of pandemic management in a number of hospitals. Dr. Elba was with us as well, and they were both outstanding in terms of giving us their perspective on the pandemic in general, and then what we're doing in Exeter in particular. The primary things that were emphasized by the doctors was that they felt it was very important that we continue to emphasize mitigation to the extent that we can, mostly because that reduces the burden on a very stressed healthcare system. That this time of year is very challenging for hospitals every year in the winter with flu and RSV and other respiratory viruses and conditions, including in pediatric wards where many of those things happen. And so the additional burden of COVID is right now primarily being made worse by a shortage in staffing. So just like we're struggling with staff who get sick or their children get sick and they have to quarantine, it's the same thing in the hospital. So they're stretched extremely thin. So the more that we can do in our community and through our schools to mitigate the additional spread will help reduce the burden. And that the way to think about reducing the burden in the hospitals isn't necessarily that children will go in with COVID, although of course that's possible, but if a child has a broken leg or appendicitis, if the hospitals are maxed out, it's harder to deal with those other normal childhood emergencies. So that was, extremely helpful perspective. We heard from our school nurse, Tammy Hughes. We heard from our ETEA representatives as well as our support staff representatives. Both groups made it very clear that they are happy to, and I can attest that they have been throughout the whole pandemic, to comply with any order or regulation, anything that the board has asked them to do. They've done an outstanding job. We checked in with the principals about the experience that they're having with student compliance across the board. They all shared that our students have been excellent. So I think overall the takeaway was, masking right now is being successful in terms of student compliance, in terms of teacher compliance. There are a number of support staff who work in close proximity with students. For instance, the aides who work in the cafeteria while students are unmasked. And so wearing masks to them is really important because they're in a more high risk position. But I think it was nice to get that team together to reaffirm a broad-based community recognition that we have to work together as a team to continue to get through this. Every member, I think, is an outstanding individual on their own, but they represent a group of incredibly hardworking people. And the flexibility and creativity that our team has delivered, I think, has really been the key to our success in keeping our schools open. A number of days we had a lot of staff out with COVID, and people are really pulling together to cover for each other. And everybody recognizes that our number one priority is having our students here in school, learning in person, and for those reasons that Jen said, keeping students connected, keeping teachers connected with those interpersonal relationships. Joe Way and the tech team addressed a concern that's come up a couple of times about our readiness to pivot in the event that we had to go virtual at any point because we weren't able to staff or we had an outbreak. And he reassured the team that we are thoroughly prepared in terms of student access to devices as well as using Google Meet in lieu of Zoom. Dr. Herring, did I miss anything that you wanted to mention? So again, it was a great reaffirmation of the committed team that we have, and the overall sense that Exeter has been and continues to be moving in the right direction and really acting as a unified group to try to do what's best for our community as a whole.
Thank you, Dr. Miner. Are there any questions for Dr. Miner?
I just have a couple of questions. First of all, were there any formal recommendations from the committee?
There were no formal recommendations. We didn't ask for any formal recommendations. We asked for on the ground status report. I would say that the committee, again, particularly the doctors, were clear that continuing with masking in this current rate of transmission is, although not a perfect mechanism by which to stop the spread, it is a mechanism. And I believe that one of the doctors said specifically, if that keeps one person out of the hospital or the ER so that another person who's having a heart attack can be cared for, that's a mitigation strategy worth pursuing.
Thank you. Just two other questions. One is related to if there is a student or anybody who's within the district, if they have a legitimate health or emotional issue associated with masking. Could you just explain that process?
Yeah, absolutely. So this has been consistent from the beginning of the pandemic. We've actually never changed our approach to this. When masking was first mandatory by the state, the Department of Health made it very clear that there were some groups of students and staff potentially who schools should consider the potential of a mask exemption. So the way that a mask exemption works is that if a student has an existing medical condition, either a mental health condition such as anxiety or a physical condition such as severe asthma, and they have an existing IEP or 504 with the school district, and the parents believe that a mask exemption is appropriate, then that IEP team or that 504 team has convened. In most cases, this has already happened because we've been in and out of masks for a long time, so unless it's a new student, this already happened. And if the team determines that, in fact, there isn't a better alternative, so, is a shield a better alternative, something along those lines, and that really the best, in the best interest of the student is that they don't wear a mask, then that student is given a credential so that bus drivers, other teachers in the hallway, principals, etc., know that that student is exempt, and then they continue to be mask exempt. So if there, is a student who has a new condition and hasn't gone through this process, they would want to contact their building principal or their nurse. And our procedure has been that if you have a medical, physical, or mental condition that's severe enough to warrant a mask exemption, it most likely warrants a documentation in the form of 504, an IEP, and other school-based support. So that's why we've been taking that approach.
Thank you. And this, my last question has to do with some correspondence that we received around lunchroom interaction. And I'm not going to repeat all that, but you know what I'm talking about. Maybe you can just explain that process.
Certainly. So one of the challenges, and the board talked at length the last time they met about, for instance, athletic competitions and having students without masks. The other time students are not wearing masks, of course, is when they're eating. And in our cafeterias right now, since we're at normal capacity, students are close together and their masks are off during that period of time. So some people have expressed concerns that if students are coming out of quarantine and then they're sitting next to their child and they're not wearing a mask, are they creating an additional level of exposure? And I, asked our nurse representative if she was aware of any transmission of that type where a child had come back from quarantine on day 5 and 6 had then that had resulted in other children getting COVID. There's no data to support that that's ever happened. At least she wasn't able to provide it in the course of that meeting, and I'm not aware of any either. And further, we, in terms of being a school system, and again, I'm going to talk about mental health a lot over the next weeks and months because I think it is really something we have to be focused on as a school community. But the idea that you would isolate a child and make them sit by themselves, or make them wear a mask outside when nobody else is wearing a mask, that's detrimental. When I was an elementary building principal, and parents started to ask for their children to sit at a table by themselves because they had a peanut allergy, we all worked very hard at identifying other students who would be willing to sit at that table with that child and also not have peanuts in their lunch and have the nurse check their lunch, because just that is a bad thing to do to kids, to force them to sit and be alone. So for that reason, we are not putting kids, in an isolation in the lunchroom. I would add, additionally, one of the things that is very, very clear, and particularly with Omicron, is that many people, and especially children who've always had fewer symptoms, are asymptomatic. And so, if you are concerned that your child's sitting at a table with a child who's coming back on day 6 after a quarantine, I think it's reasonable to think on any given day your child may be sitting at a table with someone who has COVID and doesn't know it. It's the nature, unfortunately, of this right now. So, at this point, there's nothing to suggest that that has happened or been a cause for concern. But as long as we're feeding students, and we have these large groups of students with no masks, there's always going to be the risk of spread in our cafeterias. You're welcome.
I had a question. Sorry. In regards to what you were saying about K through 4 having the ability to transition easily to if we had to go out of school, I heard a lot of concerns from the community about them not having iPads. Would we have like where they pick it up the next day? Is that like the type of thing? That's what a lot of parents have asked me.
Sure, thank you. That was something that we discussed as well. So all of our students in grade 4 through 12 we are one-to-one districts, so they have a Chromebook that they take home with them. All of our students in grades K to 3, our district technology department, through the guidance counselors and the principals at each of our elementary buildings, sent out a needs assessment survey to see if children had access to both the internet and a device that they could use at home. So not only if we went virtual, but to use First Math, to use Reading Eggs, and any family who indicated that they did not have a device, either because the parent was using the device or they simply didn't have one, we sent a device to that family already. So we have 330 devices that we have sent to households that indicated that they did not have the ability to have a child use technology. We've also sent, hotspots so that they had internet connectivity if they didn't have that. So at this point in time, we think we have around 97, 99% of our students who either have one of our Chromebooks currently in grades K to 3 or have access at home. Certainly, if there are any families that are watching this tonight and they don't have a Chromebook at home, all they need to do is contact their elementary principal or their guidance counselor, and the tech department has stacks of Chromebooks that we will happily give to them during the course of the school year, so that both for those technological programs like Reading Eggs and First Math, they can do that, as well as if we would need to go virtual.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm sorry,
Question.
John, I have one question. In regards to when the task force will meet, will that be on an as-needed basis, when the board requests it? What is it that you need from us to make that decision?
So at the conclusion of the meeting today, I invited any task force member. Again, the membership is comprised of principals, central office leaders, and then our association presidents and vice presidents. That if any, and two doctors, that if any of them felt like there was an urgency and the task force should be convened, that they should email me, and we could pull that together very quickly. We always meet virtually. The same would be true if the board, for any reason, wanted the task force to convene. We could do the same thing. We've never operated the task force in terms of a meet weekly, meet monthly kind of an approach. It's a lot of people who have a lot of high pressure and demanding jobs, but they've come together on short notice when necessary. So it would be at the request of the board or the request of any individual on the task force, or at my request in the event that there was some new information that I wanted to process with the group. You're welcome.
Just one other question is related to the calendar, since we sort of glossed over that. And in years past before COVID, that was probably one of the things that dominated school board meetings most through the years. Is there anything different, unusual on the calendar? Anything you want to point out to the board?
The calendar for next year that we've proposed is very similar to the calendar for this year. One of the decisions that was made last year was to eliminate half days. So there had been several half days in the calendar for professional development purposes. And although there certainly have been times when that has been very useful, it tends to be hard to get a lot of really concrete good work done in a half day. But more importantly, we have heard, and I think the pandemic itself has really shone a light on this, how difficult it is for families to find childcare. So when we have a half day, that sort of thing. So we've really tried to cluster our professional development days at the beginning of the school year, cluster our breaks so that parents can prepare and really try to ease the burden on parents to find childcare in those half-day scenarios. So it is virtually identical to this year's calendar. You're welcome.
Other questions for Dr. Miner? Okay, thank you, Ann. That's the end of my report.
Thank you, John. Finance, Facilities, and Audit, Mr. Mel?
First up, we have the per capita collections presentation by Statewide. So, Brian, if you know their name.
I'm sorry, Rick. Introduce yourself.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to take a moment of your time. My name is Rick Stover. I am with a firm, Statewide Tax Recovery. We're located in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and also Central Credit Audit, which is a sister company of Statewide. And I'm here this evening just to present to you an opportunity that we would have an interest in helping the district with their delinquent collections in reference to your per capita tax. I believe presently the district is using Berkheimer, and I'm just down to see if there would be an interest in a discussion that we could have in reference to Statewide. I'm just going to briefly, real quickly go through. I'm sure I've attached an agenda. I think, Brian, I sent that down Friday, and I believe it's an attachment on your agenda this evening. But quickly, in 1978, Central Credit Audit was begun collecting delinquent health care debt under the Woodring family in Sunbury, Pennsylvania. They started Statewide Tax Recovery as a branch of Central Credit Audit, their tax division, back in 1980, and we've successfully been collecting delinquent tax for school districts and municipalities and counties in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We presently, we made a strategic move in August of 2021 and moved our corporate headquarters to Allentown just to be better located as far as larger facilities, nicer facilities, very modern. And presently, we're working together. We've had success that just continues decades later from when we were originated back in 1978. We presently have, I think, 34 school districts that we presently represent, and I put a number of districts as present clients, which we have in the Commonwealth. And I've attached some references, mainly to your locale. We collect for the Wilson School District, and we collect delinquent tax for Wyomissing. We collect for Conrad Weiser, but they eliminated their per capita tax, and we continue to collect for them as well as Antietam School District. So I put a couple of references for you. And interesting, it's interesting to listen to your education system and the struggles that you're having with the COVID since it started back in early 2020. And we, as a business, we've struggled the same as you have. And March of 2020, we sent everyone home, and we had to. Everybody had to take their desktop, they had to take their laptops, and we had to figure out a VPN network to try to. We just scrambled in the matter of a couple of weeks to get everybody active and back on board. Collectors and management staff, and sales staff. So it was. We understand your struggles, and at that time, everyone we jumped into a course called Mary Schumer's Communications, and we took an online course, basically a communication system that we had the ability to just communicate not only with clients but consumers and other personnel within along with each other, and it's just been an extremely advantageous program. It's just, I mean, I got into psychology of just human beings, and it's a long way from a smoke-filled collection department that people used to. The reputation of our collection of a collection agency is really being modified, and it's I've done this since 1984, so it's just interesting to see how far it's progressed. Our strategies, our collection strategies, our personnel is extremely experienced, well trained. We understand how to collect debt. We understand how to process exonerations and speak to your taxpayers when they call in, and we can quickly take that process, get an exoneration, and submit it to you however you want it, whether it's a monthly basis. It goes to Brian to the board to approve. I don't know exactly how you handle that, but that's no problem. We have a finance department which we post payments, we refund, they analyze refunds, and we remit payments that we've received back to a taxpayer very quickly. So that department runs extremely smooth. Interestingly, we have a social media staff, and our social media staff does. We have clients that not only have a per capita tax, but also have a larger occupation tax. And so what we do is we get on platforms and we skip trace and we try to find jobs for wage attachments. That's kind of a last resort, but if we have a balance that's increasing to 1,000 or 2,000, I'll use Shikellamy School District up in our area. They have a per capita and an occupation tax, and we have balances that can be $5,000, $6,000, $8,000, $10,000 because people just don't pay their taxes, and we can find employments and file wage attachments. So it's an interesting department. Our technology, we have IVR, interactive voice responses. We have a payment portal. We have live web chat. We have QR codes on all of our collection letters that they can scan, they can open and scan it with their phone, and then they can choose how they want to converse with us, whether they want us to email them or do an SMS chat. We have Zoom partnerships. So we've kind of, our technology, we found that if we put a payment platform on our website, and we find that each evening we come in the next day and people just go right on our portal and pay, and we probably have a couple hundred of payments every morning when payment processors come in and start posting payments. Our letter and phone strategies, we've customized, retooled our letter, and we have a phone strategy that we actually have collectors that reach out and try to speak with taxpayers. And all of our skip tracing is automated. It's very important with the data that we receive, especially from the tax side, like the school district. We really only get information off of a tax bill. We basically have a taxpayer and an address and the amount that they're owed and the bill number. So we do a lot of research as far as trying to find telephone numbers, trying to obtain correct addresses for that taxpayer. So it's kind of it's a very highly sophisticated and very prosperous venture, the skip tracing automation. We can meet your needs. Our toolbox consists of first-party solutions. We're an extension of you. It's very simple. I think this evening I just saw on your agenda that there's an approval coming up to approve 2020's delinquency for Berkheimer. Where I'm going with that is that it's just very interesting that all you need to do is put the tax information in an Excel spreadsheet, email it to us, and we download it right into our system. And we have a third-party letter company that sends notices out right away. We score all of our debt. We have proprietary AI technology. And we score we do have a scoring model that we score all of our calls, our debtors, we do wealth ratings and the propensity to pay and asset reviews. And then I've mentioned our QR coding to have our communications with that taxpayer at whatever level that they choose. Our hours of operation, we're open from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. And as I indicated earlier, our IVR system accepts payments 24 hours a day. I guess your roadblocks or your challenges, obviously every school district in Pennsylvania, no matter what the tax or what the revenue that everyone needs, you're always looking at the state's trying to cut funding, the feds try to cut funding, and I think, we want to partner, we're interested in partnering with the school district just to generate whatever revenue we can for you, and we're conscious of the way we treat your taxpayer. I know that it's, people begrudgingly sometimes have a hard time wanting to pay, especially the per capita tax, a nuisance tax. So we're constantly, if someone is deceased, if somebody has moved out of your area, we'll notify you so that you can update your tax rules so you aren't not a habitual notice going out to that party when they aren't even in your district. And then lastly, but most importantly, our fee structure is structured that our fee goes on to the taxpayer, that the district gets 100% of whatever our revenue is that we collect for. So I'll throw it out to you to see if I can answer any questions that you may have.
I have a question.
Sure.
So, just because I'm unfamiliar with this process, when we look at using someone like Berkheimer Agency, what do you see as do you have any documentation of what your success rate is as far as percentages of recovery of that tax versus, you know, a collection agency such as Berkshire?
I earlier indicated about our scoring models and the propensity to pay. It really, yes, I do have records. I mean, it kind of goes from district to district, from township to township, municipality, county. So it's a kind of a wide array. I would estimate that, you know, I know for instance, the Shikellamy School District, we're up in the upper 80s, low 90s as far as the recovery percentages. You get a poor district where people just don't. They just don't have the money. They aren't employed. They're unemployed. They're on welfare, etc. We have school districts up in Elk and Cameron County up in the northern tier, and some people. It's difficult getting work up there, and our percentages are lower, maybe 50-60%. So it's just it really depends on the area. I know Wyomissing we really do well for, as well as Wilson School District. So down in your area, I would assume that we would do better than Berkheimer. We would do better than the 86.9% that's what they're getting. I hope that answers. I know it's kind of, my response is out there a bit, but it's really, it's all based on the client. Okay. Thank you for, oh, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say
okay.
thank you.
Okay. Thank you for a moment. Thank you for the opportunity.
I just wanted to make a comment. The reason I brought them in, we did this with our real estate tax collection. Other schools I've talked to use Berkheimer. They said they sold double, at least the first year, of what they normally see in delinquents. Sort of the same thing with the county collecting the delinquent real estate taxes. We're going to a collection agency that actually goes after it. So this was an option, especially since you're seeing the 2020 being turned over. Next month you'll see the 2021 being turned over. And I just didn't want to lose the opportunity to try to collect more this coming year than we normally do.
Mr. Fike, you brought up the real estate tax delinquencies. That was Portnoy
Portnoy is going
that
to
we brought in November. My understanding is they do not do per capita though. They're just real estate.
It's sort of like niche markets, they kind of call them.
Okay.
Berkheimer picks it up, but they're more concerned with collecting EIT or an income tax.
Okay.
You know, and I guess they really, Berkheimer competes against Keystone, I believe it is, the other earned income tax collector. But, you know, they do per capita and occupational, but it's like a side business for them. So, I mean, Rick, am I correct in saying that? With Berkheimer? Sure.
Both Keystone and Berkheimer are competitors, and I don't know their inner workings as far as, but I do know that they are interested in upfront EIT and LST and kind of that part, but they do delinquent per capita and occupation, but it's not kind of there. It's kind of an afterthought, I would say. We just specifically, we don't do EIT or LST tax, and we just strictly do delinquent recoveries. We do well. So I'm thank you, Brian. I just wanted to kind of reach in and jump in and just straighten that out. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion on item A?
I have a question. Brian, are there any companies out there that do it all, sort of a one-stop shop type of thing?
Not that I know of, but do it well. I mean, Berkheimer one time was into real estate, and I think they got out. it's more their legal team because there's different laws against, 511, which is your earned income tax. I think these fall under for Capita Act 679 and Act 711, so it's all different portions of the legal code, if you want to call that. So
So
it's
this
become a
is,
niche market.
yeah, it's sort of like going to a mall instead of a department store.
Right, you're going to individual stores to get
Okay.
that service.
Yeah, thank you.
And just to be clear, there's no cost out to us to use this service.
No, just even with Berkheimer, they charge the compliance fees, but it's no cost to us. I'm just looking at a way to get the money in faster instead of letting it sit there.
Brian, I didn't quite catch that. Could you just repeat, how was the contractor compensated for their effort?
Both Berkheimer, Statewide, they basically charge the fees directly to the delinquent, if you want to call it. Just like in real estate, they charge the fees directly to the delinquent. So we get 100% or we get our principal back.
Thank you.
Any other discussion on item A? Okay, moving on. Item B, LERTA application received. We received a LERTA application from Mama's Famous Pizza and Grill, the new business that opened up at 35 West 47th Street. I do believe the solicitor has reviewed this. Do you have any comments?
Nothing specific other than what's here. We're recommending against it just because it did not meet the requirements for the application. I believe it was not timely, among other things.
Okay.
Knowing that, would they have an opportunity to reapply?
I believe so, yes. I don't quote me on that one though, I have to admit, but I believe they do, yes.
I can, on our application itself, it says the application is be completed and submitted as follows. On the same day, the property owner submits a LERTA application to one of our municipalities, either Exeter Township or St. Lawrence Borough, or the same day the property owner obtains a building permit, or the same day that construction begins if no building permit is required. All three of those are over a year ago. We didn't even have a LERTA approved till October this year.
Okay. So based on that criteria, there's no way to resubmit, it sounds like.
Right, because we did not make a retroactive LERTA.
Yeah, that's right, there would not be that. There would not be a way to resubmit. They've already blown the deadlines in a sense, so.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Brian, is their LERTA being challenged or denied by the township as well?
The township approved them a year and a half ago.
Okay, so it's just the school districts?
It's a school district, because we did not have a LERTA in place at that time. We did not approve a LERTA until October. We did not, that date of October is from there forward. It did not go retroactive to any date.
Okay.
Any other discussion on item B? Okay, moving on to item C, Treasurer's Report Review with Mr. Fike and Mrs. Panzer.
Since we have a new board, and I don't think the public has really seen a lot of what they see in the treasurer's report, I thought I'd quickly review this. I did ask Elena Panzer to come here. I did promise her she wouldn't have to speak, but she can say yes or no. Elena does not like to be the public speaker, but she is the treasurer that you do appoint. She creates the treasurer's report. She balances the books every month. She also receives the bank reconciliation. All of our books and everything we do have things in place that not one person has control of anything. There's always someone double checking and verifying behind the scenes or behind the person. If I'm showing last month because you'll be getting December's results at your voting meeting. Right now she's completing the bank recs. But in your treasurer's report, you get a summary of the year-to-date revenues. In there, it also gives you original budget. If we revise the budget, it gives you the monthly activity. It gives you the fiscal year-to-date activity. Over to the very right, which most people look at, is they look at the fiscal year-to-date percentage. if you're at 100%, if you're at less than 100%. If we look at the first line last month, budget for real estate taxes was $46,933,521. We already collected $44,841,621 of that, almost 95% in the first, well, from July through November. This month will probably be close to 100, and then whatever delinquent is still be collecting through the June 30th of next year. But every line is in there, or the majority of the, I should say, the functions are listed, fiscal activity. One thing to note, when you look at real estate taxes, 95%, you're figuring you're only halfway through, but all the real estate taxes are collected before the penalty period, or mostly before the penalty period. December, you have penalty. But once December 31st turns over, the tax collector no longer collects that, they turn it over to us. We will be turning that over to the election attorney to finish collecting those taxes. So most people do pay within that time frame. If you look at past history, we've always had close to 100%, if not 100%. A couple years, like last year, we actually had over 100% collection because during the year, new homes were put on the market, and when we do our budget, we base it off the current assessment. When you add a new home in the market, it increases assessment. Those people get interim taxes. Those interim taxes go into your current real estate taxes. So it is possible to get over 100% of real estate collections. I know the previous year's budget, this year we didn't do it, but the previous year we actually budgeted for less than 100%. It was almost like 95% because they felt that people weren't going to pay their tax on time, but we never saw that. We've had a 15%, I think, a budgeted 15% decrease in earned income tax, and we came within, I think it was 0.4% of what was the previous year. So we didn't see the downturn that everyone projected the previous year with COVID starting. So that's your first section, is year-to-date revenues. Second section, if we go down to, let's keep on going, all through the revenues. The next section after that will be year-to-date summary expenditures. I think that's like the sixth page. In that, same thing. You have your original budget, your monthly activity, also there's a revised budget, your fiscal year-to-date activity. Encumbered amount. When you look at encumbered amount, that means it's money that was ordered. I'll call it ordered. It hasn't been paid yet, but when if we put a purchase order, we encumber it, so we know we cannot spend that elsewhere. So the available funds is basically what was not spent yet. That fiscal year activity will take the available funds. So everything's tracked. Every expenditure is tracked through there. Couple small places, I'm seeing we have 254%, but it's only a line item of 275. It actually came in at 700 for the year. I try to track actual expenses so we know what it'll be the following year. I believe that was Board Treasurer Services. I believe this year the 4-year bond for the treasurer is due. We can actually amortize that over 4 years and just take it as 1 year. So that's why it's a little bit over, but it's not. When you look at 254, you also have to look at the number. 254% on a budget of 275, so a lot different than 200% of a budget of 100,000. It's not. So when you go down there and you see something out of whack, look at the budget too, please. It's not just a general fund. You'll see this expenditures. We have capital projects funds, the budget, the amount spent. The food service fund will also be in here. Same thing, year-to-date budget, what was spent. Towards the end, you're going to see the student activity funds. Everything that we have a bank account, you get a report on. You basically get a report on anything was spent during the month. When there's a separate, under your treasurer's report, which we're not gonna go over here, but you'll receive, a list of bills, every single bill that was paid during the month, the total payroll for the month. When you add up all this, and if you wanna sit there with the calculator and subtract out from the previous month, everything will balance to the penny. And that's Elena's job to make sure it does balance to the penny. In this, she also gives you the, well, there's gross payroll, the district share of FICA, everything that was spent. She'll give a summary of investments, everything we have in the bank. Right now, I think we're somewhere around $50 million in our bank account. It seems like a lot of money, but most of the real estate taxes are collected already. That has to leave us through, or last us through June 30th this year. Next couple of months we might collect 2 or 3% of real estate taxes. The only thing we're really getting is state revenue. So by the end of the year we should be down to very low in the bank, maybe our fund balance of $6 million or so. And if the state doesn't pass a budget in June and July, until we get out real estate taxes, we need that extra cash or that small 8% fund balances comes out to 22 days of bills, but we need that in the bank to be able to cover payroll in July until we start receiving real estate taxes again. Elena also provides you at the end of this with your actual bank statements. Now she does redact the account numbers. Activity, that account number has been redacted, so that all this can be public information. The account number doesn't have to be public information. So if you look at these accounts, you can actually track them back to the balance sheets that she provides with this, which cash accounts for Truist, which is, that used to be BB&T. That's really it's not a checking account, it's our deposit account. Monies we receive, we deposit in BB&T, then we transfer it over to PNC, which is our main checking account. We write all our checks out of that. Credit cards come out of the PNC account. We also have, I think, probably 80% of our funds are in some type of investment, CDs or treasuries. All of our funds are guaranteed by the U.S. government. We Act 72, which is state, passed years ago. We have to either have FDI insurance or what they call collateralization. Every month we get a statement from PNC or any of our banks if we're over the $100,000 of FDIC insurance that they've actually taken out treasuries or collateralized our funds, that if everything went belly up, we'd have guaranteed treasuries to cover those funds. We'd not lose those funds. We'd lose interest, but we're not going to lose our principal. And that's another responsibility of our treasurer to make sure we have everything collateralized or under FDIC insurance. I know it's a lot. Was it 48 pages you get every month? Besides your probably 30 pages list of bills that we paid. But by law, you need that information to approve the checks and the disbursements, and by law, we should be given that. So, does anyone have questions? I moved through pretty fast because we got a lot on the agenda, but I just want to make sure everyone understands it. The other thing I'd ask, if you do have questions, please, on listed bills, when you look at them on the weekend, I know board members have always called me up and say, what's this bill about? Call us ahead of time so we can have an answer for you at the board meeting. Or, if you want to share that with other people, or if you just want it for your own self. But call us ahead of time, we're always available. Mike?
Brian, thank you. And I know that information is always available to the board. Could you just talk a little bit, you and I had a brief conversation about an issue that the county ran into in terms of approving bills ahead of time and transparency. Just curious to make sure that we don't run into those issues here as a board.
Okay. The county, I think, was actually their controller wrote them up for sunshine law violation. The county meets weekly because of the amount of bills and payroll and all different departments, and they approve bills every week. But after Christmas, they approve bills after the fact, and they never had a resolution on the books saying we authorize the administration to pay those bills ahead of time, and then we will retroactively approve them or ratify them. And when that came up, I looked at it and said, you know what? Past practice and common sense says you pay the bill to avoid a late charge. You have to pay the bill because you have a contract for payroll for the union. You have to pay the bill because you have a debt service due on bonds, and our board only meets once a month. So other districts like that, we've always had a payment in advance resolution. I do have that on
It's item K, I think.
on item K. Basically, it gives the authority for us to pay things in advance, to avoid late charges, to issue payments for timely for payroll and other payments, to take advantage of early payment discounts. Because I've found some districts where, someone, I was doing construction, the one construction manager would give you a 2% net 10. So, on a $100,000 bill, if you paid it within 10 days, you got a $2,000 discount. It's like, why not take advantage of that? But, they couldn't because the board never authorized them to do that. Utility bills, if you don't pay those on time, they'll have a late charge. So we've always paid those things in advance of the board. It's been past practice, but what I'm asking the board in item K is to put that in writing, so anyone in the future would question. It's common sense, but by law, you have to authorize us to pay in advance. Okay. Did that answer your question? Okay.
Brian, I just have a question about student activities accounts. Is that part of the report document that we get, or is that handled separately?
That's at the it's probably about page 45 or 46. It actually lists, it's Fund 83.
Okay.
And it lists, due to general fund from student activities, it actually lists clubs, if there's any activity during the year. You do get that every month. You usually don't see much on that to the end of the year because a lot of it might be scholarships. You also get those reports at, I think it's April or May, Elena? May. When we pull out money of the CDs and scholarship funds and pay out the scholarships. So that'll, your May report will see that. Actually, your report you get in June because it's the previous month you're receiving.
Do students have any control over that, those dollars, those funds, Brian, in their accounts?
They don't have control over the investment. They have control over what it's spent on. If the say yearbook, they collect it, we hold it, but we pay the bills for them, but they tell us to pay. Correct? Elena said she'd say yes or no.
Okay. Yeah, I'm glad that you feel confident with your process, because that's one of those areas that can sometimes get lost. People don't pay too much attention maybe sometimes to the student activities accounts, and that it's an area where I think school districts could probably find themselves into a little bit of hot water if they're not vigilant.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think Coatesville, I think the superintendent AD did time because they misused the student activity funds there. It's, besides having a treasurer and besides having our checks and balances, the state also comes in and audits all those accounts. And then our board appointed auditor also audits that. And then, certain funds that are federal, they also audit. But it's important to always have separation of duties. Every bill that comes through the office, I approve for payment. but I don't write checks. I don't cut those. Elena has someone else cut the checks, and she approves the transfer from the bank account to cover those checks. We also have things in place that we call positive pay. When we do a check run, we actually send a list to the bank. I think it's the date, the check number, the payee, and the amount. And the bank will not cash anything unless it's already been on that positive pay list. You know, if someone changes the payee, you know, forges and tries to pay it to someone else, we're not responsible because they're not supposed to cash that. If someone tries to present a duplicate check, and that has happened already where, you know, with new banking where you can take a picture of the check, people, you know, and sometimes it's mistakes, but sometimes they'll cash it through the picture, and sometimes they'll also accidentally deposit it too, and that gets caught.
I just want to say thanks to Elena and the rest of the business staff. I mean, they do really great work, and so many times we just don't know what's happening back there, but they're behind the scenes, and you know, everything I've ever seen has been really well organized and I think really impressive. So kudos to them. Keep up the good work with them, Brian. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I have a great staff.
Any other discussion on treasurer's report? Okay, moving on to item D, it is recommended that the Board of School Directors exonerates the Exeter Township School District tax collector from the collection of the remaining 2020 per capita duplicate for Exeter Township consisting of 1,848 delinquent per capita, 509 exonerated per capita bills, which is 86.9% collection rate, and authorize the district to submit the delinquent per capita bills to Berkheimer Associates for collection. Prior year consisted of 1,897 delinquent per capita and 662 exonerated per capita bills, which is an 86.9% collection rate.
Now, when they're talking collection rate, they're actually talking the current. So the difference is what was not collected. That'll be turned over. If the board decides to use the outside service, this would change to the outside service.
Brian, what qualifies somebody for an exoneration?
They moved out and never told us. That's a simple that, you know, they moved out and never told us. You know, a lot of times that'll be a family member that lived there for, you know, the first 27 years and they got a job and moved out there and they're no longer in our district. But we still send a bill out because they paid the previous year.
So how long do we have to make that decision if we're going to move to if we're going to outsource to a different company to do this? Would we have to table this before and first, you know, to next month and then first get a new agency to work with us?
This is for the 2020 bills, right? So if we would get somebody new, like statewide, in, that would just be doing the 2021.
We could do the 2020 also.
Okay.
You know, it's normally you would get the 2020 last year.
Okay.
Okay. The tax collector who didn't rerun did not want to do per capita, but I talked them into it because it's you know, how would I explain to the board and the public that I'm losing $130,000 in income because you don't want to collect their per capita? And he agreed, but he also knew he was going to retire.
Okay.
And the new collector she said she will collect per capita for the current.
So to Mr. Morgan's question, are we do we need to table this item? For the voting meeting?
Well, if what I would suggest, if you just put this after the statewide, and then it just gets changed to statewide on this item.
Okay.
If you decide not to go statewide, then we'll stay as is.
My only concern would be that we've only heard from Statewide, so we haven't heard from multiple different agencies like this, and while they might be the best, we do have 3 neighboring districts with Conrad and Wilson and Wyomissing, so maybe one of us could do some homework and seek out some information as to how they're happy with their service before we would make a formal decision on whether to go with them. That would be my opinion. We should do some checking if we've only heard from one agency.
If you so desire, we can move these both to February. I'd rather not turn over and then have two different agencies, because we have 2020 and 2021. It's might as well have them collect both.
Yeah.
Like I said, normally the 2020 should have been turned over last January, February.
Yeah, if the board is okay with that consensus, we could move these to February's agenda until we get more information.
Elena, you don't have a problem with that, right?
Okay. Any other questions on item D then? Item E, consumer price index adjustment, base amounts on bids effective January 1st, 2022. I believe Mr. Pike, this is.
Yes, and it's actually also, I'm trying to think what else, there was another item there, H. So this is actually H and this item. Every year the state tells us what we can purchase directly, what we need to get 3 quotes on, and what we need to actually go out to bid. This year, the Consumer Price Index and the Department of Labor basically says our bid threshold is $21,900. Anything over $21,900, we have to go out to formal bid. Now that also allows us to piggyback off of someone else's bid, like Keystone Purchasing that there's about 15 that the board has authorized us to use so far. Where someone else has bid it, we use the IU for certain supplies, but someone has actually did the correct advertisement, had the correct number of bidders, and bid the product. But I wanted the board to know that the 21.9 threshold is there. If we take you something that's outside of that threshold, we should either be telling you it's on a CoStar's contract or Keystone contract or Omnia contract or some type of contract you've already approved or we've gone out to bid for. Below 21.9 and above 11.8, we're supposed to get 3 separate telephonic bids. So we will have record of that. We will not send that to the board, but we do have proof of that because when state orders come in, they're going to ask for it. Who else did you check for this? And below that, it's up to our discretion. My personal feeling is get me at least 1 quote if you can. Anything over 500 up to the telephonic number, so we do know we're getting a better price. But I did want you to know this because it comes out every January, and this tells us, our bid thresholds.
Frank, could I just make a comment about that?
Sure.
It used to be every year we would modify policy 610, which has to do with quotes and bids. And last year in February, we modified that policy and decided we're not going to actually put those numbers in anymore. But we would always put a reference to the Pennsylvania Bulletin.
Right.
And so if you look at the current policy at the bottom, you'll see that, the current Pennsylvania Bulletin from January 2021. So I think this document that you have attached to this item needs to be attached to that policy as well. No board action is necessary because it's just an attachment, but I just want to make sure that that was included in what's updated on our policy manual.
Okay, I'll make sure Dawn attaches to the policy.
Any other discussion on item E? Okay, Moving on to item F, frontline education contract. It is recommended that the Board of School Directors approve a contract between Exeter Township School District and Frontline Education to add human capital management, employee recruiting, and onboarding modules, as well as the time and attendance module to our existing suite of frontline applications. Costs are listed as follows: a one-time implementation fee, $17,325 due at time of commitment. Annual recurring fee is $31,673.25 starting July 1st, 2022.
I do know this is under a CoStar's contract, so I'll make sure they put that on for the motion that goes to the board, to the voting meeting.
I'm sorry,
These people are under a CoStar's contract, so I'll make sure they do put that CoStar's number on there.
Okay. And go ahead, Mr. Japan.
Are you gonna move on to the next one, or are you?
No, I was actually gonna ask a question about.
Oh, go ahead, I'll let you go.
Now, I just wanted to clarify here. So it says that the district is currently utilizing the front line for teacher substitute management and professional development. Is there somebody that can speak to what we're doing now for time and attendance and if we're doing any employee recruiting or onboarding now?
Yeah, so I'm going to actually let Christy, Dr. Haller, speak to this a little bit more. Right now, we have Skyward that we use for a number of applications, as well as Frontline that we use particularly for the ASOP sub-management. So actually, Joe Way has also come out of the closet as this impacts both of them. So Joe, if you want to go first since you're out of the closet and talk about it from a tech perspective, and then Dr. Haller, Mr. Way, Dr. Haller, if you would like to talk about it from an HR perspective.
Sure, good evening. So what we're basically doing by adding these products is moving sort of light years ahead in recruiting. So our current system for recruiting, we post stuff to a website, we post to various different sites, and hope sort of that people will respond and take the step to jump in and recruit. Because we're using Frontline for our substitute tracking, it's an ecosystem where teachers from all over the area are in Frontline to be substitutes. So if they, say, are a third grade teacher and they're looking for work or a substitute and they see that Exeter has a third grade opening, it'll email them and say, look, there's an opening in third grade. So it creates a better sort of active portal to look for recruits for candidates for positions. It makes it a lot easier for Christy and the HR department to really, get quality candidates from the region instead of us sort of relying on them taking the step. It also allows the HR department to go in and look proactively. They could say, oh, look, here are 10 people that meet this dual certification requirement that we're looking for, and they can actually invite them to apply to the district. So it's a really nice tool, and that's sort of the front end of it. So right now we have a very primitive sort of mechanism of dealing with that. And then the next step is the onboarding process. So as new employees come to the district, they're getting a variety of photocopies of documents, some digital, some very old and analog. And so the recruiting and then onboarding is the next part. So it's a digital onboarding process, which includes an employee portal, which will have all of the things like any certifications or trainings when their licensures are expiring and so forth, all in this one portal. So it's a really nice way of really adding some professional features to that whole process for human resources. The other module that we're adding is a time and attendance module. The time and attendance for all of our staff is very antiquated. And the Frontline product, which basically we're using for that substitute process for our teachers. Teachers go in, they put their absence in, and then a substitute gets assigned. It's a much easier process than the Skyward portal we are using for time off. So it'll be a sort of an improvement for time off and timekeeping.
Mr. White, can you just speak to the cost offsets for the money we were spending previously?
So we're using products that are ancient. So Skyward's first database that they ever built was their what's it called, the recruiting fast track. So that was their first product. So this is really a very old product. So when you look at the suite of products we have from Skyward, we're paying for our student management, lots of other special ed modules and so forth. It's a very minimal offset. I mean, there's only maybe $6,000 or $7,000 that we would lose once we move out of those products completely in Skyward and into the front line. But I think Mr. Fike is also looking to replace some of the functions of Skyward in the business side. So it would be a good way. Again, it's the tool that most of the school districts in the area are using, and it really, if I look back to when we decided to move forward with Fast Track, this was the product that I would have preferred we moved with. But again, Skyward has so many features built into their system. It's great, and it's very enticing to just use those products. They're very minimalistic.
So just so I understand, you threw out that 6,000 figure. Are you saying that this would ultimately come out to a net cost of $6,000 per year?
No, we would basically cut $6,000 out of our expenses to Skyward, and then we would pay the 31. So it's about a $25,000 increase over what we would have had. But we don't have any of like the onboarding piece, all of those digital forms and documents management. We don't have any of that stuff really in place now. So this creates a very cohesive environment for all of that stuff. So
how is the documentation handled now? Is that just paper filing?
Sure. So to take you through the process when we post a position. So when we have a position that we need to post, we put it through Skyward. It goes onto our website, and then they go onto Skyward to apply. As Joe said, this would be a much more cohesive process where we can actually pull the job description right from the frontline bank, put it up, and then it goes out to all the network of ASOP users. So it just draws from a different pool. Then when we actually go through the interview process and hire someone, that individual comes in, and Diane and the HR secretary, Cindy Fox, goes through each piece of paperwork. Whereas in ASOP, everything is housed in ASOP and people can complete it digitally, which then the feature that is nice is instead of us trying to sort it and have it go to the business office, and then some of it stays with us in HR, and then some of it goes to the tech department because we need to get them set up in technology. It's all housed in ASOP, and then it's all dispersed through ASOP, and it stays within that portal. As of right now, what we're doing is, as Joe said, teachers will put in their absence through ASOP, but our support staff are still using paper. Some support staff have learned to use Skyward. This would house all of it. So it's just a cleaner process, and the teachers are already familiar with it because of putting in their absences. And then they also put in their professional development through there as well. It used to be called My Learning Plan. Because that's another piece that is somewhat disjointed. When they are putting in for conference requests, they're doing it through My Learning Plan. When they're putting in for to take a course, a college course, to further their education, they have to do it through Skyward. So it just makes everything much more efficient in the district for professional staff and support staff, and then streamlines all the paperwork that all the different department needs will need to onboard someone appropriately and efficiently.
Mr. Fike, can you just confirm that we have money in the budget to cover the cost of this?
Yes.
I just have a couple of questions relative to this. First of all, with ESOP, do you have to opt in to have your data used in the manner in which you are going to use it? So, for instance, you talked as basically a data mining tool for potential recruitment of teachers. Do they have to opt in to have that data access?
Only teachers that want to be like our teachers use it for their reporting their time off, but substitutes opt into it on their own. And many of our folks before they're teachers were substitutes, so they've opted into the data as well.
Can I just add to that, Mr. Shapina, if you don't mind? One of the things, I think we've discussed, and again, it'll be another recurring theme, is how tight and how competitive the job market is right now, and the difficulty of drawing candidates. And Mr. Way alluded to it, but I think really understanding it, is important. If you are a teacher who just came out of college, or you just moved into the area, or you're a sub and you're looking for a position, right now, the majority of school districts in the Tri-County area use this platform. And what you can do is you can just go in, let's say you apply to Westchester School District, you put in all of your information, and then you also want to apply to Pottsgrove and Owen J and Exeter. You just transfer it via a passcode, and you don't have to apply to 20 different districts. It's just transferred out to all of those districts. But what's even better than that is every Sunday night, you get an email of all of the job postings from all of those districts. So it's being actively pushed out to potential candidates. So with Exeter not being in that mix right now, we are at a real deficit. You have to know Exeter or come from Exeter. It's just this step of sending, and so many schools sending people just Sundays, it just appears in your mailbox, all of the listings. I think that's the space that we want to be in terms of being competitive and being on people's minds. I'd also say, one of the things that we've worked hard and continue to work hard as a team is the I don't know if this is a word, professionalization of the district in terms of branding and so forth. So when I first got hired, my very first impression was, paperwork for healthcare and so forth that had been, as Mr. Way said, copied and recopied and was diagonal and was crossed out, and it certainly doesn't make for a good first impression. And then as an employee, when you have so many things to worry about, your open enrollment for health insurance and all those things are all on this portal, so you don't forget that slip of paper in your mailbox to sign up for direct deposit or whatever it might be. And then finally, ultimately, a cost like this, in addition to drawing employees, our HR department, Dr. Haller and Mrs. Kornbacki have worked really, really hard to get a handle on where all of our employees are and what they make and how many there are and what hours. And because we've had all of these different piecemeals of Skyward and ASAP and paper here and paper there, ultimately that comes at a cost to the district, not really having a good sense of where your employees are, what they're entitled to, etc. I think that as Mr. Frank said, there's money for this in the budget, but ultimately I think that cost is an investment really in human resources at Exeter that we really, really need.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely a seller's market right now. If you're a nurse or a teacher, you pretty much can have your pick. So one of the questions I had is this is really sort of handling the technical aspect, the recruiting, kind of the blocking and tackling of the fundamental things that you have to do in order to get a flow of people coming into your organization. So and sometimes though a digital approach can seem a little bit impersonal. So what is the thing that we use to sell people on wanting to be a teacher in Exeter? How do we, once we've vetted them, once they've come through that process, what is the thing that we talk about?
Well, I'll let Dr. Haller answer that because she's really, I think, perfected that at this point.
So I go back to the good old-fashioned phone call. I call people personally. I think sometimes people are surprised that the HR director is calling people personally. Oftentimes, depending on the high priority of the job, I will call and schedule the interviews myself. So that way I can introduce myself and talk to them a little bit about the district. And what I'm finding is that other districts perhaps aren't doing that. They are leaving that to a secretary. And I think that personal touch of that you've applied to Exeter and this is the HR director and we're interested in you coming to interview with us and thanking them for the time that it takes to apply, I do think that has been helpful and has gone a long way. We've been relatively successful in getting positions filled as quickly as we possibly can. The main holdup for us is if the person is currently employed, which is obviously a good sign because they're doing a good job somewhere else, is that districts are in the same boat as we are and they're holding their employees 60 days, which they absolutely have every right to do. But I do think it's important to reach out to people and let them know that what a great community Exeter is, and that you want to work here and be a part of our staff.
I would also add to that, more and more we are relying on referrals, especially in administrative positions. You know, if you know somebody that you worked with in a prior district, that's become really important. The network of our employees with other employees to talk about why they work at Exeter and why it would be a great place for them to work as well. I think Dr. Haller really nailed it, that it is, you want to have this technological component for the professionalism and the ease, and that's what people are accustomed to, but adding that the personal touch, I think she's really done a terrific job with.
And I don't want to underestimate the personal touch, because I do think that that's critical. So when it comes to sort of looking at features and benefits of the role, you know, again, lots of organizations are doing sign-on bonuses, retention bonuses, finder's bonuses, you know, you name it. Do we know sort of what criteria people are using in selecting jobs? Are they all looking for are they looking for money? Are they looking for culture? Are they looking for future opportunity? What's driving that?
I'll start and I'll let Dr. Haller finish. I think it really depends on the role in a lot of cases. I think one of the primary motivators for people in a competitive job market is to work in the district in which they live, especially if they have children. Being able to go to your child's sporting event immediately after work, or the ease of childcare, or go to your child's play. A lot of the staff that we've seen leave Exeter have left to go to their home district, and a lot of employees that have come to us from other districts have come to us because they live in Exeter. So I think in terms of both commuting time and connection to your community, and again, it's particularly if you have children, that's a huge selling point. The other thing that, you know, we're seeing and hearing in terms of being in an era for the first time where teachers really are leaving mid-career and going other places because the job market is, you know, the pipeline of teachers just isn't there, is, you know, being competitive at STEP, which is like their years of experience, with districts that we're likely to recruit from. Other positions, for instance, like bus drivers, being able to say to someone that will train you to get your CDL, you know, that's a big driver versus you have to have your CDL when you come to the table. When you're looking at executive positions and administrative positions, oftentimes that is pay-based, that's benefits-based, that's the reputation of the board, the organization, etc. So I don't think there's a singular answer. I think it really varies to some extent by employee group. Dr. Haller, I don't know if you want to expand on that.
I would agree with that. A number of individuals we've hired this year are residents, and they were very excited to be able to work in the district where they live, where their kids go to school. 3 of our last hires are Exeter residents, and we were thrilled that they would want to come here and work in our school district. As far as some other ideas, yes, there are places that are doing signing bonuses, especially for support staff type of positions. Bus drivers is one of the positions that they're very difficult to fill, and it's very competitive. And recently, it seems as though, in addition to signing bonuses, because the job market is so tight for teachers, there's actually some murmurs of retention bonuses, where if you stay for the year, then you will you receive a certain amount of money throughout the course of the year. And then all of that, of course, is, you know, up to the board as to how you would want to proceed with us looking into something like that.
Is there anything else, anything unique that other districts, maybe not in Berks County, but that they're doing to try to you know, head this off? Because you know, again, part of where I'm going is I'm looking at, you know, if it continues to be the crisis that it is, do you have to step back and look at class size? Do you have to look at some of those other things that can diminish our ability to actually be effective in the classroom? And I'm just wondering if that's...
Yeah, absolutely. I think the challenge in public education versus in the private sector is that most of our positions are bound by labor negotiations and contractual agreements. And so there, in a private business, you may be able to say, tomorrow we're going to throw $5,000 out, and that's a little trickier in public schools. So I'm not aware. I do think Reading is doing is for that retention piece. I mean, I think there are things like that happening. Honestly, the long-term issue for Exeter as well as everywhere, I think it's got to be handled legislatively. I think if somehow the state doesn't actively step in, the number of teachers coming out of schools of education is so small that it is a problem that I think actually needs legislative work. The other thing that Dr. Flam and I and Dr. Haller have been talking about is this idea of trying to grow your own teachers. There's a really interesting model that the University of Pittsburgh has with Pittsburgh Public Schools, where students who want to go into education basically do dual enrollment in their 11th and 12th grade year as education majors with the University of Pittsburgh. They graduate from their high school with half of their college done for free. And then when they come back to student teach, they come back to the Pittsburgh Public Schools to student teach, and they're pretty much immediately hired. So I think we're going to have to look at those types of more creative mechanisms to grow teachers and get them through the pipeline more quickly and into districts. So I think there's a lot of challenges for all districts across the nation, in the coming years.
This challenge across all education spectrums, so not just public education, but private or Catholic education or cyber charter schools. Are we seeing that across the board?
To be perfectly honest, Mr. Trina, I'm not familiar with what's happening in parochial schools or what's happening in cyber charter schools. I'm primarily familiar with what's happening in public education across the country, but I don't think it's a leap to say, again, when we were talking to the doctors today about how stretched thin hospitals are for nurses and those sorts of things, that this concept of the Great Resignation, if the Dunkin' Donuts isn't open, restaurants and stores are, there's really just a problem with getting employees. But I think in education, it's particularly a challenge, and this is where maybe parochial private schools have an advantage. If you have to have Pennsylvania certification, if you have to, do all of those things, there are not a lot of shortcuts to get there. You can hire someone to work at Dunkin' Donuts tomorrow. We need someone to have gone through 4 years of school, and then if you want them to be a principal, they have to have gone through school and then taught for 5 years and then taken a principal exam. And then if you want them to be a super, it's a really long timeline to get people into these jobs. So that's why, again, I think it's important for school boards. And I know Dr. Hemberger has been active in, speaking with, and others of you as well, speaking with representatives, speaking with senators. But I think the state of Pennsylvania needs to really think about how it's incentivizing young people to get into schools of education and become teachers, because this is not going to be a crisis that ends with the pandemic, because they're just not in the pipeline. It's going to be a problem for a decade, I would say, at least.
I have several questions, and I want to preface it with saying that I understand the having a portal for everything, how nice that is, and how much we want to see that. And I appreciate the explanation of where we are in Exeter and where we need to get to. My concern is around the dollars that Frontline is proposed here. So first of all, I don't know if the district has looked at other paths besides Frontline. We're looking at cutting out a $7,000 antiquated system, albeit, so I understand that. But Frontline is offering a $31,000 a year first year, and then a 55% of that additionally as a startup fee. And then on top of that, they're asking for, we're looking at a 3-year contract, and they're asking for a 5% increase year over year, which is much higher than the average taxpayer gets as an increase. And my other question is, we say that we have it in the budget, which is good if we do. The question is, knowing that inflation is coming in all aspects of what we're seeing, including construction and things like that, is it better off for us right now to be able to save that money, knowing that we're going to be having these crisis inflation situations as we go through, the next budget year. So while I appreciate the fact that we need it, I'm wondering if right now is the time to spend that much money.
Mr. Morgan, I would say absolutely right now is the time to spend this much money. Part of the reason it's in the budget is we've been talking about this for about a year, thinking about different products, thinking about what's on the table. And this is one of the hardest things, I think, in any education budget, I imagine in any budget, is what is the cost that you can't see, right? You could see Skyward versus this. But right now, the way the application process runs through Skyward, it's so poor that when we have candidates for principal, things like that, that I'm going to be on the interview process, somebody, my secretary, the HR secretary, literally prints a hard copy of every single application for me because it's so difficult to navigate in Skyward. So that's somebody's time. And then I'm literally sitting there as a superintendent going through all of these paper applications. I can't sort them by certain criteria, etc. Dr. Haller is doing the same thing. So the amount of manpower, and we all, if you, multiplied out our salaries by the hour that we would save by having a tool like this versus the time it takes Mr. Way or the time, I think, again, it's hard to quantify in terms of you just see one price tag and you see another. And, Dr. Haller, Mr. Frank, please weigh in on this. I really think we're actually going to save money in terms of the salaries that a number of us get paid, that we could be devoting our time and energy to other things that right now we're wasting because we don't have an effective tool. And Exeter is way behind in adopting something like this. I would say most districts went to this particular product or something similar, but for the majority, I think this 5, 10 years ago. I mean, we really have wasted a lot of people's time and energy. I'm not sure that we've had the best candidate pools. I'm not sure our employees have had I know they have a good experience in terms of, their benefits and those sorts of things. We're so fortunate to have Ms. Skornovaki. I mean, she works so hard and she's such a wonderful person and she connects everybody with what they need, but it doesn't need to be that hard. And I think we are spending a lot of money on hourly wages that could be put to much better use to use a system that doesn't work. Dr. Haller?
Yeah, when I first took this position, obviously I was already familiar with Skyward as a building principal because I used the elements from the student side, but also as a building principal, you use the HR side because of Fast Track and also approving employee time off. Of the two systems, having been familiar with ASAP from the My Learning Plan side as well as the the substitute teacher side, ASAP is a much better product to use. It's just easier to navigate. There's a lot of issues with using Skyward. You never can seem to replicate the same report. It's very problematic. As Dr. Miner said, just simply sorting through candidates, every piece of information, their resume, their letter, their clearances, their everything is separate attachments in Skyward. So when I print out an application packet, because I go through their resume, I read all their letters, I have to go through each applicant, print that whole packet out, and it takes a while to do that for each applicant. And sometimes when we have an elementary teaching position over the summer, we had over 100 applicants, and people take time to apply to us, and we should be going through those. So it hasn't been efficient, and it's difficult for our staff to navigate. The implementation cost of $17,000 is a large amount, but that cost is also to help transfer over what's currently, correct, Joe, currently in our Skyward system, as well as it's inclusive of the training that we're all going to be going through, and then building what we need for it to be in Exeter. So this is going to be months of work for HR and IT to be working with ASAP to make sure that while it's a product, it becomes the product that we want, that we need, that best meets the needs of Exeter.
And as we go through this implementation process, my plan would be to start with the employee recruiting. As soon as that module is online, we're going to take that online and use that so within the first month, we'll probably have that module in place. Then we'll work on all of the forms, which will probably take a lengthy amount of time. While we're doing that, we'll also be planning what the time and attendance will look like to be live in the fall. So, I think we're going to be using some of the products. The implementation cost is their standard engineering cost. They waived, the proration, which they were talking about. I'm sure there really wouldn't be a proration, but that was the discussion, that we'll waive the proration so that you can implement the product, use it as soon as you have it online until July 1st, and then pay the first yearly installment on July 1st. So there were some discounts, of course, which, sure, 10% here, 25% there, but the rate that we see is, probably the typical rate for what it will cost to implement. From my perspective as the IT director, I sit in on interviews, I hire people, and the process is very cumbersome and very time-consuming, wasteful, paper here, paper there. A lot of people spend time saying, hey, let's build an electronic system where we can have a Google Doc and we can share and come up with a scoring rating, all this stuff. And it's fine, but we spend a lot of time spinning wheels doing that stuff, and it's great, and it's innovative, but those are tools that we should have already. And Dr. Miner said we're coming from behind, and when people apply here and they see that, and they go to Dr. Holler's office and they see the mounds and rows of papers on the floor of all the packets of all of the candidates, Dr. Holler could be at home and she could just log into the portal and she could see everyone and have one packet for everyone digitally with everything in there. She could see the scoring rubrics for the applicants. She could see the interview questions, and everything would be in one spot, and it really would save a lot of time. Once we hire a candidate, communicating to all the stakeholders, like my department, when they're starting, what classes they're teaching, all of those details, who they're replacing, just getting that stuff in place and communicating with the personnel action form. So again, on top of having Skyward and on top of having paper, we have email forms that we use to send information around. So there's lots of, I think, Mike, you were talking a little bit about opting in and maybe data security. In our situation, the paper is really the most dangerous kind of format we could have for this, because it's really not secure at all. We've got piles and piles of forms, and sometimes they have social security numbers on the applications. So it's extra steps that we have to take to really secure that information. So the things that we're not seeing, the money, the cost of savings are really, there's a lot of transparency, but I think I heard someone say that a normal HR organization has about one employee for every 100, one HR person for every 100. We have 3 right now. Right now we're down, we're down 1 at this point. So having the right tools will really help them to be very much more efficient in doing their jobs.
I think this is kind of a classic example of penny wise, pound foolish. I legitimately, we have spent a lot of time as a team, with Brian, with Joe, with HR, and really thought about the cost associated with just not really having a system. I don't even think it's fair to say that Skyward is a system. As Joe was saying, there's like a million piecemeal things, and honestly, ultimately, not only does it cost the district time in terms of everybody who works here that's involved in the hiring process, our salaries to do all that extra work, I think it costs the district when we don't have the ability to quickly generate reports and make really informed decisions. It's always a struggle to get who has this certification and how many years that they've been there. And I just think the inefficiencies undoubtedly and the inaccuracies cost the district money that just has never seen. I'm certain of it.
Just to circle back, I think Mr. Morgan asked this, I don't know if I heard an answer, but was there other software platforms that we looked at other than Frontline?
We did. There are several other products that do a similar type thing. They're all sort of already part of ecosystems. So I'm totally drawing a blank on the other product that's part of PowerSchool now, but they're just called PowerSchool. It's a very similar thing, but districts tend to use my learning plan for their teacher for all of their professional development, professional growth, and like they already use a product for substitute. I don't think the Power School product does any of that. So there's a huge disconnect to having them separate. So there is a value. I think honestly, Frontline. I'm trying to think if we got a quote from Power School. I don't think they ever responded actually.
Yeah, we also had difficulty getting certain vendors to respond. But just to add to what Mr. Ray said, he brought up about the ASOP part, which is the substitute teacher. We already use 2 of their products. So we use ASOP and then we use the My Learning Plan. And later on in the agenda, you'll see about the substitute teacher. There's a lot of districts that have gone to their different services. They have outsourced their substitute teacher piece, whereas ours is in-house. And just having the whole process from the substitute teacher as well as My Learning Plan also include the time off or the time in attendance for support staff, as well as the onboarding piece, which we don't currently have at all. It would just add a lot of different pieces that would just make HR, the business office, and the tech department run more efficiently.
Yeah, I don't think there's really one product that does everything that we're going to see when we have everything in place. Power School, again, if we were using Power School as our business, as our finance system, I think there would be maybe some way that you could say that would work. But again, it's part of that bigger system. The ASOP stuff, the frontline stuff that we're talking about is going to be its own employee, basically, portal for all of that information. But like I said, I'm not really sure. Oh, what is the name of that other product? We use it down Chester County. Talent Ed, right. And the Talent Ed is just sort of the recruiting side of it. So there's lots of vendors that have competitive pieces, but none that have a competitive suite, I would say.
With the quote that we have here, it has the 2 bundles, the recruiting, the hiring, and the time and attendance bundled together. Is there a way of seeing a quote where it's just the recruiting and hiring separated from that?
Initially, we had that, I certainly could do that. There is a benefit to getting 3. They have like a 1 application price, a 2 application price, and a 3 application price.
Yeah, if you could, I'd be curious to see what
Sure.
that is. Thank you.
Yep.
I have a couple of questions. I guess to Dr. Miner and Dr. Haller. Have we heard from any candidates who said, I'm out of here because of the stacks of paper and the inefficiencies?
No, the paper piece is on our side, but it's not uncommon for us to receive calls from candidates because they're having difficulty trying to navigate just applying to the district using Skyward. Jen Breton, I can't remember exactly what she said, but when someone goes onto a website, within a matter of like so many seconds of clicking, they decide if they're going to stick with it or if they're going to leave the site. And if you go on Exeter's website, while it's at this point it's beautiful and it's all cleaned up. If you go to employment to try and apply for a job, you'll see that trying to apply through Skyward is challenging.
I would add it's particularly challenging for support staff. In fact, Dr. Haller, wasn't there a point where you were just saying to people, just email me because custodians, that sort of thing, just couldn't even, it's so designed for teachers in particular, and
we don't want anyone to be deterred to apply because they can't navigate the site. So whenever someone calls and there's a struggle, oftentimes Cindy Fox, the HR secretary, or Diane, we would walk them through it, or we would just have them email us whatever the information is, and then we would upload it ourselves into the system. Because again, we don't want to turn away a candidate for applying for a position.
Good, thank you. And Dr. Miner, you mentioned a few minutes ago reputation. Are you aware of any candidates who looked at our U.S. News and World Report profile and said, you know what, I can do better than this?
Mr. Fiddler, I'm not. I mean, unfortunately, we never really have a sense of when a candidate doesn't apply, what turned them away, why they didn't apply. But I think I would compare. We've all probably been on got an email about a product, and we're like, oh, that's interesting, and then we kind of went into it and it was like, oh, this is just too hard to buy, and you move on. I just think, again, we need employees to be applying in every single level of this organization. And the cost of not having an employee, the cost when we don't have a sub to kids, missing their special, the cost when we don't have a bus driver to not being able, the cost of not having employees is really, really high. And I think, to have a factor that's a deterrent be, it's just too hard to apply, I think is really a downside. I do think, though, Ms. Fiddler, to your point, ultimately, and actually, I think this is a Mr. Japina quote, but I remember being over in Awatin, I think last fall, and talking about my goals from last year and my entry plan and the idea of branding, that we were going to decide what the logo was and that we were going to make the website look like a professional website. And Mr. Capita said, we also have to talk about the brand, right? It's like the branding, right? So I think we look a lot better. The boardroom doesn't have stoves in it anymore. The website, looks like a really professional website. Jen has done a beautiful job with that. I think having something like this application, it looks better. But I think to your point, it's also building the brand. I think as our scores go up on U.S. News and World Report, for a lot of people, they want to be a part of something that they feel is getting better and growing and doing those things. So it's hard to quantify, but I think we all know it's there. It is the branding and the brand. And I think we are, our team has done an outstanding job. And again, I was with people at all levels of this organization through, what is unquestionably the most difficult 2 years in, the history of education, maybe, continuing to build that brand and then have the branding that does it justice. So I think your point is well taken, that there's all this brand work that we need to continue to do, but I think we're moving that needle, and I think we're moving the branding needle, and I think, the things that we've done in the past to save $1 here and to save $1 there, they have costs that aren't clear. And I'll give another example. It seems maybe completely unrelated, but our teachers for a number of years were told that they could not buy, through the bid, like a celebration pencil, like a happy birthday pencil or a good job pencil, that, you could only get yellow pencils, because they cost a fraction of a cent less. Well, that might seem dumb. A pencil is a pencil. But if you're a first grader and it's your birthday, that's a big deal. If you're a second grader and behaving is a challenge for you, and you look down and you see your good job pencil, and that's a big deal to you. So that's not an easily quantifiable difference in terms of a budget, but that is the kind of thing that really matters. And I think there was a lot of times over the last decade where Exeter has chosen to save pennies or hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars, but the real costs have been greater. Another example I use is, Maggie Haller is a good personal friend of mine. We met her at the board meeting the other night. I happened to be at Awatin when she lost her tooth, and she came out and had it in a baggie. And I'm like, why don't we have treasure chests? Why don't you have a necklace to put your tooth in? These are the kind of things, and I know they seem like, why are we spending taxpayer monies on a treasure chest? That really matters to a kid. Losing your tooth is a really big deal. And if you feel like school is a special and safe place where you get a treasure box when you lose your tooth, those are, these investments, I know on paper it's more money than the other thing, but they're intangibles. And I think we need to be smarter about spending money on paper because it has those brand benefits for our employees, for our students. And we're having to do a lot of cleanup, I think, on things that just weren't done that way. But if we really want to push the brand forward, this is what we have to do.
Thank you.
Any other discussion on item F? Okay, moving on to item G, the 2022-2023 budget discussion. Mr. Fike will discuss the budget timelines.
Okay, I'm just gonna read some timelines that I have on, they sent out to the departments. I actually sent them out their budget books in, December. I gave them to January 14th to get major maintenance improvement requests due to Steve Biggerstaff by January 14th, personnel requests due to Dr. Minor, Dr. Holler, and myself by January 19th. Impact forms are due by the 19th also, and budgets are due back to me by the 20th of this month. My plans are to put everything together, then go back and talk to the department heads and make sure that what they put in there is needs, not wants. And prioritize, have a budget book together for our committee of the whole meeting in February, and that time we'll set regular budget meetings. We'll sit down with Dr. Minor, go back over any personnel requests, and make sure that our budget's aligned to our goals. That's an important thing. When Dr. Minor mentioned the treasure chest, when you think treasure chest, it's a little quarter box that's on a necklace. I've seen them in other districts, and kids wear those like it was a trophy. Those types of things. There's other things that I've come across that we stopped filling the medicine cabinets because why should we pay for someone's aspirin? Well, guess what? If they have a headache and they have an aspirin here, they aren't going home. They're working. So those types of things. It's not. I just want to add it to what you said. I'm sorry. Those types of things I put in the budget. It's very little money, but it goes a long way for retaining people. That you appreciate the teachers, you appreciate the staff, you appreciate the students. I think the parents then see we appreciate their students, their children. So on the budget timeline, I do have a motion tonight to not to vote on next meeting not to exceed the index. From what I'm seeing, we do not have any exceptions that we claim. We're not way over in special ed or extra costs in that area. The index resolution, when I say not to exceed, the maximum we can raise taxes by the index, the adjusted index would be 4.5%. Last year was 4%. It's a 3-year average of consumer price index and a bunch of other things like your ability to tax. I'm hoping we don't have to go that way, but right now, by passing that resolution, it gives us to basically the end of May to adopt the budget or post the budget for the public. So we plan to have meetings from February on. In May sometime we'll adopt the preliminary budget or adopt the motion to advertise a preliminary budget and adopt the final budget in June. By law, we have to adopt it by the end of June. We can always reopen it if the state changes their budget. It doesn't have to adopt their budget, but
Yeah, I'll just add on to what Mr. Fike said. Jumping down at item H, talking about the index resolution, I think historically this board has always tried to vote for the index, or at least bring it to the table to authorize that just in case it was needed as a safety net or something like that. That does not mean that we are entertaining or saying that we are going to raise taxes by 4.5%.
And the other reason you actually have to pass that resolution, I'm not sure exact date this year, but it's 110 days prior to the primary election. Because if you don't pass this resolution, you want to go above the index, and you have to have the taxpayers vote to exceed that, and they have to know it prior to the primary election. It has to get on the ballot. So everything has a reason why you have to pass something. I think it might be the second week of February, which we don't have a voting meeting before then, so I'm asking for you to pass that and January voted meeting. Prior years, we passed it in November, December timeframe, but I didn't think that was fair with the number of new board members coming on board before, to let the new board make that decision, not the old board.
I just want to make a clarification, because I think your point is really well taken, Mr. Mel, that when people see 4.5%, they might be like, oh my gosh. And I just want to clarify that the purpose of this resolution is to say that the district will not exceed that number. Theoretically, if the board didn't pass it, it would be more of an indication that we may exceed 4.5. So it's certainly not the amount, but it caps us at that. If we didn't pass the resolution, theoretically, we could be saying we're going to try to raise it 7 or 8. So I just, that people understand that it's actually capping us, not saying that that's the amount that we're going to propose for taxes.
Thank you.
And there was one other thing I wanted to get the board's feeling on. We talked about this last year, and it seemed like the board was split, so we didn't do anything. Does the board still want me to include an activity fee as a revenue item for 22-23 year? We did not have one in the 2021 year because we were virtual, so we didn't have fall sports, so we didn't feel it was fair to, the board said not to charge it for winter and spring sports because it's one fee for the whole year. If they play all 3 sports, they only play 1 fee. Does the board want to keep that up, or does the board want me to create a budget without it, or both ways?
Do we have any idea how much revenue we're talking about when we
It's about
incorporate-
$70,000. And I know last year the board was somewhat split on whether we should charge students to participate or not charge students. So I thought I'd bring this up at this time.
Yeah. It is, and I can't recall from those discussions from when I've watched, but is there assistance given to families that cannot afford that activity fee? I think that's where I see a problem.
We do have waivers. We also do have private citizens that actually give money specifically for that because they don't want people not to participate if they can't afford that $100. I'm not sure how many people don't even ask for it or don't participate because we have no idea on that. Yeah. A lot of people are proud and won't admit they don't have the money to pay for the child.
When would you need a decision on that, Mr. Pike?
Well, we need it before we adopt the budget, but what I'd like to do is show it both ways, or at least keep it out there right now.
Yeah.
But I know I'm pretty sure, Mr. Japino, you were here, Mr. Fiddler, pretty much last year was close to either keep it or not to keep it, right?
I'd like to see, as you just said, Mr. Pike, see it both ways.
Okay.
We can see the numbers and see what the impact on the final numbers are.
Okay.
I'm sorry, can you just clarify, because it's not hitting me right now. So we did not collect activity fee for this school year.
No, the previous year we did not because we did not have
But for
in-person
this-
sports in the fall. So by not having this fall, the board waived the activity fee for the whole year because it wouldn't have been fair to charge the winter and spring people when they did not charge the fall fee.
Okay.
But this year we are charging that.
We are
activity
charging
fee.
it for this school year.
Right.
So you're just asking if it should be included.
Yeah, because there was discussion last year whether we want to keep doing that in the future or not. And I think was it fair to the students or not fair to? And I didn't want to automatically think you'd want to keep it in there.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you said about presenting it with both options, with or without, if you're able to do that.
Yeah.
I think that makes sense, just to see that, because I don't know if we'll probably don't have a decision quite yet.
Okay. So Everyone, there's no problem with the not to exceed resolution?
Yeah, no issues here, which is item H. Any discussion on that?
So we would move that to the voting meeting next week then.
Correct. And then item I was, I think, a repeat of the item E. Is that right? Okay. So then, if there's no other discussion on that, we can move into item J, which is the bus maintenance garage update.
Okay. So our plans were, well, first of all, the bus maintenance garage, the property would be turned over to the contractor on the 17th to start fencing and putting silt socks that week. The following week, they plan to demolish a building, start removing topsoil of soil. They'll also be removing the gas tanks or the underground tanks. That could take up to 2 months. The plans are that they would have the foundation laid sometime in April, May. The steel's coming for the building the first week of June, and that seems like it's a solid date. In the meantime, we have gone to our original plan. We moved the buses to the different schools. We do have temporary fueling tanks for diesel and for gas. I have an arrangement with the IU. It's a month-to-month lease for $525 a month to use their facility over, I think it's Tuckerton, but it's actually right on the other side, 222, going towards Leesport, to maintain our buses and to inspect our buses. Our mechanics went over there, they would bend and look at the facility, and I don't think there's a problem there. We were talking as a plan B to the township about, I originally went to them and asked if we could use one of their garages, and they came back and suggested the promenade because there's a Midas muffler shop there that they thought we could use. But those talks really fell apart. I went to the township last night, and they want us to pay full cost of everything, the property, including their taxes and insurance,
Yes,
plus a triple net.
Triple net lease was thrown out last night, which I think would be not in anyone's favor.
Yeah. And I try to explain that this is same taxpayers as we have, but my estimate they're still going to come back with an offer, but they're talking maybe 30, 40, up to $60,000 that we'd be paying for them. Where I'm looking at a month-to-month lease, as long as we need it over at the IU's property for $5.25. Now, yes, it will cost us maybe $200 in fuel to move buses back and forth when they need to inspect or do maintenance, but it's a lot cheaper. The promenade property, I think they quoted me $725 a month just for water because they have one big meter that fills that whole property, and that's what the meter charges me a month just for the water. So it's not completely dead, but Plan B doesn't look good.
Yeah,
we're going back with Plan A.
Yeah, I just want to compliment Brian at just even looking for these opportunities for intergovernment, relationships there, and going to bat for the district at the supervisor meeting, even though it was a bit contentious. I feel like I think he represented the district well in that conversation.
Does anyone have questions? I know there's been talk. We have some buses parked on Dunham Drive between the junior high and high school. There's been people saying, how can you park on a public street? But we own from Ripeton School all the way up to the baseball field. That is all private road. So, the township doesn't maintain that. We do. We're actually parking the buses where they pick up in the morning or drop off in the morning and pick up in the afternoon. During snowstorms, they'll be moved into the teacher's lot while they clear that off and then put back there. We do have a temporary diesel tank below our garage. We have buses parked there. I think we have 8 or 9 buses at Awan and several at Jackson Hall. original plan and the future plan is to keep the vans here at Wash. We have plenty of parking there. We have temporary tank for gasoline back of our garage, which all of our vehicles or trucks, maintenance trucks use. The tanks will go back to the Kerr Road once the above ground tanks are put in. The plans, hopefully, as we go back in there sometime early fall, they do have on the contracts that substantial completion must be done by April 2023. But it looks like if everything comes in the way it's supposed to, we'll be back in there by fall. The only thing that might go into the following year will be the final finish coat of cattle, because they usually like to put the base coat and then wait 4 or 5 months before you put the finish coat, make sure there's no wear or settling. But most townships, and I think they agreed last, that's one thing they did agree, they would issue a temporary permit if it was just the final coat, to be put on, then we go back in. So, and any questions or? But I know there's been a lot of social media chatter about the buses being all over. Ben moved them out a week early because he didn't know what the weather was going to be the following week.
I haven't seen the social media chatter, so I guess I missed that. But do you have any just issues around the security of the buses, or the just being sort of diffused around the community, just vandalism or anything like that? I mean,
No, we haven't had vandalism at Kerr Road. Where they're at, they're under lights, they're under cameras. The lower lot below the tennis courts, we have a lot of buses at the high school. You have to go through the property. There's no other entrance there. It's hard to get down there. It'd be easy to see someone going through there. One thing about our community, it doesn't seem like we have any problem with that. At Kerr Road, there's no fencing around that property. I think the first time we've had anything, we had a broken window this year at Kerr Road, and I don't think that was probably someone throwing stones, not realizing they hit something. It could have even been, someone driving through the property and picking up a stone, but we don't know because there's no security cameras there to even be able to follow back. All we know is we had a window broken on one of the buses, and that was the first time they said they had any vandalism. I'm not even sure if you call that vandalism because it could have been someone cutting through the property from the alley up, throwing a stone. So knock on wood, things could change, but I don't think we've ever had a problem before. Don't expect us to have a problem in the future.
I know one of the questions I saw floating around there was about the block heaters. I assume that last night was a pretty good test of that, and it seems like everybody got to school this morning okay. And
yeah, they actually put something in the gas called DEF or something that really I don't think they've had to plug in the block heaters in years. Even though we have the outlets, where they just and the outlets they only had was for maybe 10% of the buses. So they've never had a problem. It's not like we're out in Wisconsin or Minneapolis, that they have 10 days in a row below zero. Now there will be some additional time in the mornings during snowstorms because we do not, with the way that the fleet spread out, we do not have the sweep that drive underneath, so they're actually be sweeping off. They call them roof rakes to take the snow off because by law we're not allowed to drive commercial vehicles on the roads unless the snow's removed. So there'll be a little additional time, and Ben knows that, the staff knows that to come in early to clean the buses off before they can leave there.
And they won't be blocking fire lanes either.
No, they're not blocking fire lanes. There was a I don't want to call it a problem. At a lot, they were told to park up against the curb. Well, they parked up against. They're actually supposed to back up against the curb, not pull up to the front curb. So there was a couple against the front curb. They still go around the back, but they're supposed to be against the back curb, which allowed the whole fire lane in the front to be used. But that's been corrected.
And just to also add to that, Mr. Pike, I think you had Sergeant Bentz or
Yeah, we
who's
got a call
fire
from the police
marshal.
department. He double checked. Yeah, we're fine.
Then I just had a question about the IU facility.
Yeah.
Does that monthly figure, does that include maintenance, anything maintenance, or will we be sending our mechanics?
Oh, our mechanics go work out there
They'll work out of there?
on our own buses. Yeah.
Okay.
And they actually gave us storage here. We will be taking certain things on our van over to our own tools and stuff because mechanics like to use their own tools, but they said we can use theirs if need be. You know, the one thing that will happen is we'll probably be using their inspection stickers because the state has this rule you can't have 2 inspection licenses at the same place. But it really doesn't matter because we both get them for free, inspection stickers. But our mechanics inspect any bus.
Any other discussion on item J? Okay. Moving on, item K. It is recommended that the Board of School Directors authorize the business administrator to issue payments timely for payroll and other payments to take advantage of early payment discounts and rebates and to avoid penalties and fees. All expenditures will be published and subsequently ratified by the board at the next available public voting meeting. Only those expenditures that require payment of the district as described in this motion prior to board ratification shall be made in this manner.
I do want to say I did throw this by Sharon Montaigne, and she verified this is a good motion. And yes, we should probably have this memorialized in our minutes.
Brian, is this for a limited time, or is this going forward from here?
This should be going forward. You can make it if you want every year to redo it. This has been past practice. It's also common sense in my mind. I think I'd be fired if I was paying late fees every month because I waited for the board to approve paying the utility bills. But there should be something on there saying that I can do that, and that you're going to ratify those.
And the board motion would reflect not board approval, but board ratification, right?
Well, you'll be approving and ratifying bills each month because there's a lot of bills that this does not cover. You know, if I'm not going to avoid a late fee, then it'll go on the list of bills and be wait. You know, the check will go out the next day or.
I'm just saying, a lot of times boards will use the term ratify as sort of code
right.
for indicating that it was already, the money was already spent.
Right.
And approval as sort of kind of an understanding that this is not yet purchased.
Right.
It helps to clarify the action.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd like to see that personally as part of our practice if we do this.
Okay.
Just to clarify for us
right.
that this is a ratification versus an approval.
Yes. And it's payroll every month. You're getting the amount every month, but that's already been incurred. We have contracts that you've already approved those contracts. So there, the law states you have to approve every payment of bills. We're not supposed to pay anything, but you've also approved the contract that says we're going to pay employees every 2 weeks and what their contract states. So it's sort of in conflict because you've already approved the contract. You said we have to pay them, but the law also says you have to approve the payment of those bills. So this covers both of those. And I think Mr. Japina brought up earlier, asked about the county controller writing up the county supervisors for a Sunshine Act violation. This is exactly what it was. They approved bills instead of ratifying them, and they didn't have a motion to allow on their books to allow the staff to pay bills, and then they'd ratify them later. You were asking that, right?
Any other discussion? That is it for my committee items.
Thank you, Mr. Mel. Personnel Committee, Mr. Morgan.
Mine's shorter than yours, Mr. Mel.
We can trade.
I have two things tonight. One is an informational, one is for discussion. The informational is about a job position description change. Position of supervisor of student supports is being changed to coordinator of student supports. And there was a attachment for the revised description. I'd ask Dr. Miner if you could elaborate on that for us. Thank you.
Certainly, Mr. Morgan, I'd be happy to. Last year, the board approved the position of supervisor of student supports. That is a position that we feel is vital towards our 100% graduation rate. And basically, just to remind the board and the community what the position does, it's designed so that students in high school who are at risk of not graduating and don't have IEP case management have a case manager. So it's basically case management for regular education students who are at high risk of not graduating. Typically, the profile of a student like that is complex. It may involve homelessness. It may involve issues in the home. It may involve transiency. It may involve drug and alcohol issues. There can be a lot of things, even just attitude towards school. So we think having somebody who is focused on these students and the complexity of their case, attending conferences, attending interagency meetings, etc. Our guidance counselors do a fantastic job, but they're maxed out in their current responsibilities. Our assistant principal is the same thing. So again, we had decided that this was important, and we still believe it's important. The role had been filled by Melissa Devlin. Melissa Devlin had a variety of supervisory roles here. She supervised English language arts. She had been an assistant principal role, but she has taken a job in another district, and so now we don't need that position to be supervisory because it was never inclusive necessarily of supervising staff members. So by changing it to coordinator, it does two things. One, it opens it to a much broader array of candidates, so hopefully helps us get a great pool of people. And two, it saves us about $38,000 actually dollars because the Act 93 rate for a supervisory position versus a coordinator position is about a $38,000 a year difference. So we think we'll be able to get the same service and our students' needs met, be able to draw a good candidate pool, and then be able to save the district $38,000 a year in salary.
Dr. Miner, I have just a question about the Title IX coordinator role. It says Title IX coordinator for all student-based investigations, K to 12. Isn't that Mrs. Holler's role? Isn't she Title IX coordinator?
Yes, so she is Title IX coordinator, and as you know, with the changes in Title IX, the depth and breadth of investigations has become huge, and the amount of time, and so it's a job that often takes multiple people. Dr. Haller always handles it when it's employees as the director of HR, but when Title IX issues happen between students, so not a student and an employee, but simply between students, it's appropriate to have somebody who focuses on that. And again, to have this person, especially if we're able to have somebody who has a mental health background, has a counseling background, that sort of things, often if it's found not to be a Title IX violation, there is a need for counseling, there is a need for mental health support, that sort of thing. So in terms of ultimately the Title IX process, Dr. Haller would maintain her responsibility for the final result, but this person would help her with all of her other responsibilities, focus on student investigations, but under her leadership.
Yeah, I don't want to overstep, but I just think that the way it's phrased, it almost appears as if
we could clarify that.
Just rather than supporting or assisting the Title IX coordinator with, as opposed to actually being titled Title IX coordinator, which I think has some legal ramifications as well, so.
Yes, absolutely. I'll ask Dr. Haller to make that change in the job description before we approve a candidate.
Just want to add that I think that this is a great position. I think that, whenever we look to add things, in this case, it's not necessarily adding things, and we're actually keeping it and saving, which is, a win-win for us. I always like to look at what our strategic goals are as a district. This definitely falls directly into what those goals are. I like the fact that it identifies at risk, and this is helping us to maybe get those kids that might have slipped through because of one thing or another. I guess the question I have is, when we say at risk for not graduating, are we identifying these kids as early as 9th grade or 10th grade, or are we just looking at seniors and saying, oh no, we better get them back on track? Maybe you could explain about that.
Absolutely, Mr. Morgan. So when I started here, I've told the story several times, but when I saw our graduation rate at 90%, fell then to 89%, the idea that 1 in 10 students wasn't graduating in Exeter, I just couldn't possibly believe that was true. It is and was true. And so last year, I think our team, made Herculean efforts to get seniors to be able to graduate. But we obviously don't want to be doing that. We don't want to be, having a crisis after the fact. So we want to be as proactive as possible. Not only because we want kids to graduate, but also, be successful in high school and enjoy the high school experience, and be prepared for a career afterwards and all those sorts of things. So not only is it the goal to reach students in 9th grade, it's to reach students in that transition from 8th to 9th. What do we know about a student coming out of the junior high that might set them up to struggle? But it's not an exclusive window. So if we had a student move in, there's a variety of triggers in terms of their credit acquisition, whether or not they're failing classes, whether or not they've been referred for, various issues, that sort of thing. So, a student could conceivably be put on the case as soon as they came from 8th to 9th, or any time between 9th and 12th grade.
Dr. Meyer, I have another question. In terms of this person's employment, is this someone who will be under the Teachers Association contract? I don't see it in here.
Yeah, it would be an Act 93 position.
Oh, an Act 93 position.
Mm-hmm.
Could that be clarified
Yes.
in this as well? I think it's probably good to kind of make sure that.
Absolutely.
Because otherwise, I was just assuming it was. Is this a 10-month position, sort of?
It's Act 93. It's 12 months.
It'll be 12 months.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's not clear either.
So part of what we are hoping is that we can offer services throughout the summer. A lot of students who are at risk, the nature of what puts them at risk doesn't disappear over the summer, whether that's mental health counseling or other types of support. So to have that person be able to offer that continuity, as well as we're hoping to have a person who their past experience and their credentials and qualities would assist us with professional development for our general teaching staff, our support staff, on how they in their day-to-day roles can be supportive of the students at risk as well.
I'd just like to say that after you get somebody up and running, I just wanted to note, I think it'd be great for us to hear maybe twice a year from this person, just to hear how they're doing and how this service is helping our students and helping us to get to our goal, which is to get our students all the way through. So
I think that's a terrific idea, Mr. Morgan, and ultimately, I think to hear from students who graduate, their personal experience, I think, will be really rewarding as well.
Any other discussion? Okay, the next and final topic up for discussion for personnel is daily substitute rates. I know that this was brought up last year prior to us being on, or the new of us being on the board. I know that Dr. Haller has some information on substitutes and would like to open it up to you, and then maybe we can have some cross discussion after.
So just to share a little bit of history about the substitute pay here in Exeter. A number of years ago, the substitute pay came up before the board, and at that time, it was decided that the pay would be increased to $135 per day. After some time, there was a reevaluation of that, and the central office recommended to the board that it be dropped back down to $115 per day. I can't say for certain because of lack of data whether that 135 increased the sub rate or if it hurt our sub rate. However, what I can tell you moving forward now a number of years is that based on the research that we've done with the assistance of one of our secretaries who was quite helpful, is that a number of districts in the county have gone to different sub services. So they've outsourced their subs. So it was not possible for us to get the sub rate that they're using. There is one district currently in the county that is paying $175 a day, and that is obviously quite a bit of money. There's another district that has raised their sub rate now up to $135, which is where we were, as I said, a number of years ago. I do think because of the competitiveness of trying to attract substitutes to come to Exeter, that this is the time to reevaluate that sub rate and look to raise it from 115 to something, like I said, a little bit more competitive with the hope that we could attract more subs to work here. In speaking to one of our principals, who had come from another district, she had also mentioned to me that there were substitutes from the district she was at previously who had contacted her who would like to come to Exeter, but they just simply couldn't do that because the sub rate was substantially lower than what they were currently getting paid. So I can't promise to anyone that raising it will absolutely make sure that we have 100% fill rate day in and day out, but I do think that it could potentially attract more substitutes to sub for us, or at least be a little bit more, be loyal, because there are substitutes. If anyone here has ever been a teacher knows that when you're trying to get a job, you're going to sub wherever the job is open, where you can get a job consistently, and where you can be paid the most day in and day out. So that is the information that I have, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Christy, what's the hours worked for a sub?
It's about 7 hours, 7.5 hours. So when you divide that by $115, and it's hard to compete with that when Dunkin' Donuts is paying $17.
Is there a benefit to a retired Exeter teacher to be a sub in the district?
So I do not recall what that number is off the top of my head, but our retired teachers are paid more. Most districts do that. They do pay more for substitutes. And that is also very helpful because Governor Wolf just signed a bill allowing certified retirees to sub more than they have been in the past.
Can you explain to the board what happens in a school setting when we do not have somebody to fill an open classroom spot?
Sure. So at the secondary level, because of the way the schedules are, teachers have prep periods. And the building principal, usually along with the building secretary, look at those schedules, and then they look at when teachers have open prep time, and then they pull those teachers and craft a schedule so they can cover the open period. So essentially, the teacher loses their prep period to cover those classes. At the elementary level, it is more challenging because teachers are assigned to, the classroom teachers assigned to one class. So in order to cover the classes at the elementary level, we look to our specialists, which means that we pull our specialist teachers to cover classes, and then in turn, the children do not receive their specials, and teachers also they won't be receiving a prep because the specialist will be in the classroom. Previous to COVID, oftentimes in order at the elementary level to try and preserve a prep, we were able to split classes at Lorraine and Watton Creek because there were more classes that we were able to do that. So that way it would allow us to preserve special time for students as well as planning time for teachers. But given the current state right now, we certainly don't want to add more students to classrooms. So unfortunately, the specials are being sacrificed. At the secondary level, one of the accommodations that we've made to accommodate the lack of subs is oftentimes we will have to have students report to an auditorium where there might be more than one class in there, so we can cover more students in order to ensure that they're supervised and then they're given work on the computer, because at the secondary level we're using Schoology.
So what happens, like what occurs within the child when they find out that they miss a special? Like, I mean, what, do they go back into a classroom? Do they, like, what happens?
So, so it's disappointing. I have a child that's at a Watton Creek and she's missed multiple specials. I believe today she might have missed the library, so she's very sad that she didn't get a new library book. And it's hard on the teacher because they're missing their planning period, and teachers have a lot of work to do to plan for lessons for the students. That's part of their professional responsibility. So it's not, and for the building administrator, it's also very stressful when you start checking ASAP at 4 o'clock in the morning, then 5 o'clock in the morning, and you see that you have 3 classes uncovered. Now you have 6 classes uncovered, and you're trying to figure out how you're going to cover all those classes and make sure children are supervised.
And the specials are like library, gym, music. Are there other
Art.
So the fun stuff.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep, you're right. That's the fun stuff.
You know, geometry.
Dr. Haller, you know, I seem to recall when this discussion happened last time, I was not part of the board, that I remember that there was the question asked, you know, did we see a difference in the amount of teachers or the amount of subs that were brought in by us increasing the rate? And I could be incorrect in saying this, but I thought one of the reasons that it was dropped back down was because we really didn't see that pool of substitutes increase. Clearly, we are in a different situation right now. If we were to take it to that threshold that we are aware of that 175 or even say to 180, do you think that in doing so that we would increase the amount of substitutes coming in, that we would be able to, you know, have some pressure relief for some of those specials and different things like that?
So, I mean, 175 is high. And even in talking to people down in Montgomery County, I don't know that there's a lot of districts. I could be wrong, but 175 is definitely high. If you take it to 180, again, that's higher. Are we certainly going to attract people to come here? Sure. Are we going to solve the sub crisis and have 100% fill rate every day? I can't say that I could promise you that. But what I suspect will happen is that a district will come back then and raise it to 185 and then 190, and so I do think that the sub rate needs to be raised. I do think 115 is low, but I don't know that that it would make sense to raise it to that 175. But it's certainly that is of course up to the board.
I just want to.
No, go ahead.
I just want to throw in, you know, earlier I talked about, you know, legislative solutions. You know, this is a real problem because although maybe Exeter decides and can do that, Antietam can't do that. You know, what I think at some point, you know, legislators need to step in and establish, you know, maybe a maximum rate, because we're all competing with each other. We're all in the same business. You know, all of the schools in this county are all trying to do the same thing, and to get to the point where we're having bidding wars on bus driver pay and substitute pay, because teacher, whatever it is, because there just aren't candidates. You know, the richest districts are going to have substitutes, and they're going to have bus drivers, and they're going to have all of those things, and everybody's going to move to the, you know, the collar counties around Philadelphia where, you know, money is never an issue. So this is a sidebar, but I do think that, you know, as governmental officials and board members, we do have to think about this, that, you know, it's not sustainable to have a bidding war with everybody on every topic moving forward. I mean, it's going to crush school districts. So while I do think it makes sense for us to have a competitive rate, I think for us trying to have the highest rate is just going to set up the next district to set theirs even higher. And I think that's a point where, while I feel very strongly that Frontline will save us money, I don't feel that, you know, being the highest priced person in the submarket solves the problem in a way that it makes the fiscal sense to be putting out that kind of money.
And just to add to that, I do think it would be helpful to have a tiered system. So, you know, we do somewhat have that where we pay daily subs the one rate, and then when you sub past 20 days, we pay another rate, and then we pay our retired teachers another rate. And I do, from my perspective, I think loyalty is very important. That if we keep getting people in, they know our schools, they know our students, they know our teachers, they know our schedules, and that would be tremendously helpful. And I think also being able to attract retirees is hugely important, because our retirees, they are so dedicated, and to try and attract some of them back would, I think, also be extremely helpful.
That might be an area, to go back to Mr. Japina's point about a bonus. You know, if you sub for Exeter for 50 days in the course of a year, you get $1,000 bonus. You know, I mean, because it's not just about the daily rate. We want people to keep coming back. You know, the more they come back, the more they know the buildings, the more they know the students, the more they know the teachers, and the more predictable, you know, day to day it is that we can have those fill rates. So I think if the board wants to think creatively, I think incentivizing, you know, giving a bonus for X number of days that you sub for the district might be the kind of place to utilize an approach like that.
Last question to Mr. Fike. You know, if we were to propose a number for a daily sub rate, it's just, you know, we could use 175 because it's what it is. I'm not saying we need to go there, but given that we know that there's a crisis right now, that part of that crisis, a large part of that crisis related to the pandemic, can we use that difference of that $60 a day? If we were at 175, can we use ESSER funds for that because it's educationally based?
You probably could, but the other thing you got to realize right now is we have unspent budget for substitutes because we haven't been able to get substitutes.
I guess my point
So you know, we budget to have, you know, a certain amount of substitutes a year, and we're probably not even a third of the way we're going to finish it.
Yes,
Number that we really needed. So there's unspent money that's already budgeted that's not going to be used.
We have money in the sub account.
So you'd actually be supplanting, and you don't want to do that.
So, Dr. Meyer, then would your recommendation be that we look at a number that gets us through the crisis? So maybe say, you know, we want to be at this level until the end of the year, and then reevaluate that number if we need to bring it back down.
I don't know what the definition of the end of the crisis is really going to be, Mr. Morgan. I mean, I know that, you know, obviously right now we have more people out because of COVID. We have some subs who don't want to sub because of COVID, but the reality is, you know, as we talked about earlier, that pipeline is drying up. We don't, you know, students are not graduating and then subbing for 3 years waiting to get a job. They're just getting a job. And frankly, you know, teaching is so hard and has been so stressful under the pandemic that when people are done, they're done. They don't want to come back and sub. They want to play golf or do whatever, and it's well deserved. So I think that the board really shouldn't think of this as a short-term issue. I think if we're going to increase sub rates, I think it should be, you know, a focus on I'll share that every previous district that I worked in utilized a substitute service. And when I came to Exeter, I was really shocked that Exeter didn't use a substitute service. And what I found initially was that we ended up with a better fill rate because the people who were subbing for us were actually committed to Exeter. They were retirees, they were community members, and everybody wasn't fighting over the same pool of subs in a substitute service. So historically, that's worked well for us. So I think that the target should be, and I would say this about our salaries in general, should be being competitive, not the highest, and incentivizing loyalty, longevity, that sort of thing, and expecting that it's for the long haul. I mean, that we're going to need to do this for a while, and and adjusting budgets accordingly. I just think if we pay 175 this year and then next year we go back to 115, we're just going to be back at square one.
I've got a question to either Dr. Minor or Dr. Howard. Do we know what all the districts are paying? You mentioned a school district at 175, we're at 115. I guess my question is, where are we in the 18 public school districts?
So it was difficult to get that information because so many districts use Kelly services. So what they pay, their sub rate is not readily available. But what I can tell you is that based on the research, that the highest was 175. We are not the lowest. We found a district that is at $100, which is close by us. But there are districts that are hovering around 130, 135, and again have that tiered system. So I think raising it does make us more competitive and would be helpful.
Would it be fair to say that we're near the bottom, not at the bottom?
I think that is a fair statement to make.
Thank you.
Dr. Meyer, I'd ask the administration to, give us your recommendation for what you think that hourly rate should be. And Dr. Herring, I'd like to even see this get pushed to the voting meeting. I think it's a necessity. I think that one of the things that we've talked about, albeit at the Pandemic Task Force meeting or at the emergency voting meeting that we had 2 weeks ago, or last week, however long ago, was that our goal is to keep our kids in school. And if this is one more, when we talk about mitigation efforts, there's a lot of ways you can look at mitigation efforts. One of them is making sure that we have enough educators in our school that we can keep those schools open. And if this is one more step that we can take to have enough sub-fills to keep the schools open, then I think it's at least worth the bringing it to the voting meeting.
Mr. Morgan, Mr. Pike, and Dr. Haller and I would be more than happy to look at the numbers, do some research, and bring forward a proposal in the form of a motion next week for the board to discuss.
Thank you. Any other discussion?
I just have one more question. When you were doing your research, I know Dr. Keller spoke about the tiers, and I believe I read somewhere that, like she said, incentivize working more time. Does that reset at any time? So if I work 20 days and then there's no sub positions for me within the next 45 days, if I come back in 50 days and you have 15 more days for me, do I reset at a lower rate or do I stay at the rate I was?
I don't believe so,
Okay.
but honestly, based on the pool of staff that substitutes we have, if you wanted to work every day, we could have you in a classroom every day.
Okay.
Because based on the daily reports that I send to Dr. Minor that she sends out to all of you, you can see the number of unfilled positions that we do have. So we could certainly have someone in a classroom every day.
Okay. Thank you. No, I wasn't sure if it reset.
I was going to answer that most schools, it's school year. So September through June.
There's also a differential pay rate for a long-term substitute versus a daily substitute. Dr. Haller, do you want to just explain real quickly the difference between those two things?
So when we hire a long-term substitute, they're typically in a position for, I believe it's 45 days. They also receive insurance through the school district. Of course, they could waive it if they didn't want it. But they're hired at $40,000. And then that is basically divided among the days that they're with us. That's what we typically do for.
It's prorated. It's an annual.
It's prorated.
And they have to be, in order to be a long-term sub, because I imagine if I was on the board, my next question would be, well, why don't you make everybody a long-term sub and have them work for 180 days? They actually have to be substituting for an individual in order to be considered a long-term sub. So they have to be for a person who's on maternity or something like that.
That's it for me.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Policy Committee, Dr. Hamburger.
Thanks, Dr. Herring. What you'll see on the agenda are three policies that we've already had some discussion on. These are up for second reading at our next voting meeting. These are the three policies that have been modified. They are existing policies, but they've been modified to include a statement which directs staff to report a student, a threatening student, to the threat assessment team, and then to work in coordination with the team to kind of ensure that the student is not a threat to other students, to staff, to the community at large. Again, these were discussed during the first reading discussion, last committee of the whole. Certainly, we can have discussions on these if you care to, but simple revisions to existing policies. Are there any questions? Thanks, Dr. Herring. That's all for my report.
Thank you. At this point, we would be moving to public comment, but I don't have anyone signed up. Is there anyone in the public that would like to make a statement or comment? Okay. So we will then be moving on to what we'll be putting on the agenda. We're going to be moving forward the following items to our voting agenda: the meeting minutes, district calendar, staff conferences, LERTA application, frontline education contract, not to exceed index resolution, payments in advance of board meeting, daily substitute rates, and policy for second reading. Are there any board members that would like to be heard at this time? If not, then that would conclude our January Committee of a Whole meeting. We'll be back Tuesday, January 18th for our voting meeting. The board will be meeting tonight in executive session to discuss personnel matters. And thank you. Have a good night.